Good now, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Performance Management Meeting, the Scrutiny Committee. I think what we're going to do, because this is quite an important meeting and it's a first, is perhaps go round so that everyone who's listening knows who's in the room. So if we start with probably Duncan and then go all the way around.
Yep, Councillor Duncan Kerr, leader of the Green Group, and Councillor for Oswestry South.
Thank you. I would just so that everyone's aware, Duncan actually isn't a member of the committee, but he is sat at the table and he's going to be presenting his alternative budget.
Councillor Roger Evans, a member of the committee, presenting, and we will see later on.
Councillor David Bassmer, a member of the committee.
I'm Alan Mosley, a Labour member of the committee and representative from Castlefield and Dillerton here in Shrewsbury.
I'm Julia Buckley, I'm a member of the committee, I represent Bridge North, I'm the leader of the Labour group.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is James Walton. I'm Executive Director of Resources and the Council Secretary for Finance.
Good morning, my name is Ben Jay. I'm Assistant Director for Finance and IT and Deputy One Fund.
Thank you. My name's Claire Wild. I'm actually Chair of the committee and I'm representative for the Severn Valley.
Good morning and Happy New Year to you all. I'm Tanya Marg, I'm the Exec Director of People and hold the DCF and DAS role at Shropshire Council.
Thank you. I'm Rachel Robinson, Executive Director for Health, Wellbeing and Prevention and also the Director of Public Health at Shropshire Council.
Councillor Robert Macy, Councillor for Gowran, Slackton and Western Rim.
Councillor Chris Cofield, member of the committee representing Oswestry East.
Councillor Joyce Barrow, representing St Oswald and Deputy Chair of the committee.
Councillor Peggy Mullen, member of the committee, representing Whitchurch North.
Councillor William Butler, Tidbury Mortimer Ward, portfolio holder for finance and corporate resources.
And Gwynn is not a member of the committee, but he's here to assist us today in this role as portfolio holder. Thank you.
I'm Sarah Dutton, I'm from the comms team and I'm just here observing.
Yep. And
Tim Ward, committee officer.
right, thank you very much indeed. Okay, so item number 1 is oh sorry, I'm obliged to inform you that this meeting is being live streamed and recorded. Item 1 is apologies, we haven't had any. Item 2 is disclosable interests. Do we have any? No. Okay. Item 3 is minutes from the last meeting, and they've got to be altered because Chris was here.
I was here.
Yeah.
I think there's been a mix-up, Chair. With
Yeah. Okay, so if you could sort that, please, Tim. Thank you. Do we have any public questions?
No public questions, Chair.
Okay. Do we have any member questions?
No member questions.
Okay. So item number 6 is the alternative budget proposals for the financial year 22-23. So this is a new way of
23-24.
Pardon? It says on here.
Financial strategy, mid-year.
Sorry, beg your pardon, Chair. It's the alternative budget 23-24.
Yeah, that's what I said.
I thought you said 22-23.
Oh no, sorry, 22-23. 23-24, you've got me doing. Yeah. So next financial year's budget. So this is the first for everyone. And what we're doing this time is all the opposition groups are coming forward with alternative budget proposals. So it isn't quite as we'd envisaged because all the budgets, the alternative budgets, have basically been prefaced on the cancellation of the North West Relief Road. However, and I will get Ben Jay to come back on that in a minute. However, of course, if we cancel the North West Relief Road, then we will be unable to capitalise the monies. And so this will create £20 million worth of pressure within the revenue budget on top of the £20 million that is included in the alternative budgets. So I'm going to invite Ben to speak on that. And also, I spoke to Roger yesterday, And Roger was going to ask a question about the Oxon link. So, do you want to ask your bit about the Oxon link, and then Ben can come back and reply to it all, Roger?
Thank you, Chairman. I'll try and be brief. Shropshire Council as a body came forward with the Oxon Link Road a number of years ago, followed up then and did a lot of work on it, and then followed up with the North West Relief Road. Later on, the council decided to combine both the projects in the interests of efficiency and cost saving, and it all became known as the North West Relief Road. I note in the budget that if it was cancelled, or it's estimated that £20 million has been spent at present, in my budget and also the other opposition budgets, we've all suggested that this should be cancelled. I'm not going into the North West Relief Road because that's been rehearsed elsewhere, and this is the finances for 23-24. We have a problem that what does council do if the North West Relief Road does not get planning permission? Then, using the arguments that's put forward today, that £20 million that has been spent plus contract cancellations would place this council in an almost a 114 position, i.e. it would not be able to meet its revenue consequences, because that £20 million would go into the revenue budget. It couldn't manage its day-to-day expenses. I asked the question during the preparation for this, what would happen if it did not get planning permission? And the answer that I obtained was that, well, we would have to put in a subsequent planning application in to look at it another way. My comment to that was that if we did cancel it, then could we not decide to put a planning permission in? We could put another planning permission in for just the Oxon Link Road and say, after some reflection, the North West Relief Road, which is separate to the Oxon Road, could then put planning permission, which would then still leave a capital project in place, and the £20 million then would be put towards the Oxon Link Road and capitalised on that. And my information and everybody's information is that the Oxon Link Road will release money in the end to actually pay for the cost of all the work that is involved in producing it up until now. So I have great difficulty with the papers that are before us today saying that if the opposition parties cancel, and if Shropshire Council cancels the North West Relief Road, this must go into the revenue budget. What has Shropshire Council and the administration, and we are a scrutiny committee, what is their plan B if it does not get permission, if it does not get any extra funding from government? Because again, as I understand it, there will be need for extra capital investment in the North West Relief Road, because the business plan is now some 3 years out of date. I read what the MP has said, but with the extra capital that would be needed or assistance from government, as in written answers, and the portfolio holder, to my memory, said that no extra application will be made to government until the business plan was published for this so-called North West Relief Road, which won't be until sometime next summer. So the council is at risk at present, so I'll be interested to hear any comments. Does that sum it up, Chairman?
Yes. I mean, I think regardless of the Oxon Link, I'll let Ben reply. You've still got £20 million worth of unfunded revenue costs. And I just want to let Ben reply and get this out of the way. Julie, have you got anything to add that is related to the budget? Yeah, okay.
So because the North West Relief Road is externally funded through a contract with central government, as part of our monitoring and reporting, through the PID and Prince 2 process, we have to be able to state whether we do or do not have planning permission. Until and unless we have planning permission, it's a binary measure. So unless we have it, we don't have it. So in any reporting for external funding, until and unless we have permission, we must state that we do not have it and what our contingency position is. So just to back up Councillor Evans' comments, the administration must do the same piece of work to present to the funder the contingency position until and unless planning permission is granted for the North West Relief Road. Unless anybody in this room can tell us that you know in advance what the result will be of a future planning committee, it must be stated to the funder.
Is a business case around the development of the North West Relief Road, and within that, yes, there are significant milestones within that in terms of the approval. If planning permission wasn't granted and the North West Relief Road didn't progress, then at that point we would have to deconstruct all of those funding mechanisms and disaggregate from the expenditure which elements relate to the North West Relief Road, which elements relate to other work that's progressed, which relates to the Oxon Link Road, what is the implications for other parts of that progressing or not progressing, and we'd work our way through that. As a result of that process, there would be absolutely some one-off funding, some of which would be capitalised depending on what actually gets taken forward, which we wouldn't know, because if we only got planning permission refused around the North West Relief Road, there would then be further applications that would come back in terms of what we would do. Those that we wouldn't progress at that point in the once we understood that at that point in the future, what doesn't progress would then have to be brought into revenue, and the cost of that would have to be picked up. It's for those reasons that we keep things like contingent reserves, the general fund balance, etc., to deal with those high-level risks that we have. We assess the level of those risks in the calculation of things like the general fund balance to identify what the risk is of those things not progressing or not progressing. At this point in time, we don't have that decision, and therefore we can't put a number around that in any great specifics. But that's the process by which we would adopt this.
So what you're saying, James, is it's a capital project.
Yep.
Until it's not a capital project, and the not being a capital project is either where it doesn't get planning permission, or whether we cancel it.
Fundamentally.
Yes. And if either of those two things happen, then it comes within the revenue budget.
And there's a normal process to
Yeah.
manage it with
Okay.
administration.
Okay, fine, Julia. Okay, so that was quite technical. So going to get Ben to answer Roger's question around the Oxon Link.
So my understanding around the position and the connection between the Oxon Link Road and the North West Relief Road, and Councillor Evans is of course absolutely correct that those two things have been brought together to some extent in terms of planning. There's kind of two elements of this which is worth bearing in mind. The first is that the finances can be separated, and to some extent those finances can be separated based on estimates and assumptions that can be made, so we can maintain separate accounting for them. Having said that, the operational side of things, not the financial side, the operating side of it, those two schemes have become increasingly interlinked. Partly, as Councillor noted in what he was saying, there's a benefit in terms of managing two projects together, partly also because they've got some similar objectives. It's not to say that they can absolutely not ever be separated, but the feedback that I received around some of the proposals that were being put out by the opposition groups as part of this alternative budget proposal process, the feedback from the service area was that it was very difficult in operating terms to disaggregate the two, certainly at this point in time. So I think there's kind of two elements to it: the financial element and the operating element. And the feedback that I was given, particularly on the servicing side, so part of this alternative budget proposal process, was around seeking comments from the relevant service areas of the council as to whether or not the proposals were, in a sense, kind of feasible or viable. And the feedback that I received was that actually it's quite difficult in operating terms, certainly at the present time, to disaggregate those two.
One question, Roger, then we're going to move on.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. In the medium-term financial strategy, which is before us today from the Cabinet, on page 31 of today's paper, it does say Oxon Relief Road expenditure 23-24, 1.65 million. Northwest Relief Road expenditure £10 million. So it is identified in the capital budget the different expenditures that are being done. So in 23-24, there's £10 million at risk of a planning permission, which I think puts this council at real financial risk. So that £10 million would throw dire consequences onto the residents of Shropshire if it goes ahead in 23-24. It's there in the capital budget for £10 million, and if the Northwest Relief Road is cancelled, where does that £10 million get picked up? Using the arguments that were just put.
Okay, so Roger, you're identifying this £10 million worth of pressure. You're also identifying another £20 million of pressure with your budget and another £60 million worth of capital pressure. So I don't really see where we're going with these alternative budgets.
I'm sorry, Chairman, I'm not. That £20 million which has been spent is on the Oxon Relief Road and the Northwest Relief Road. It needs to be separated. That's already been spent. And the Oxon Relief Road has been going for a lot longer, and it was almost ready for planning permission to do it when it got amalgamated with the Northwest Relief Road. So there is a difference between it. So that £20 million, which is just lumped in this, and can I compliment Ben on his assistance that he's given to myself and maybe the other opposition parties, but I do have great difficulty in the assistance that some officers have given Ben in producing the information that we asked for. Like £20 million Northwest Relief Road goes into the revenue budget if it is cancelled. Sorry, it doesn't. It is identified there for the Oxon Relief Road and the Northwest Relief Road. The expenditure for this current year on the Oxon Relief Road is 785,000 and 3.9 million on the Northwest Relief Road. It's there in black and white, but on these budget proposals, £20 million into the revenue budget, and this council has problems.
Right, I'm going to stop you there, Roger. So I'm going to ask you a question, Ben. So, what is the position? If the Northwest Relief Road was cancelled, would it put £20 million worth of pressure on the revenue budget?
If the proposals followed through in the way that the alternative budget process has been put together in that context, at the present point, the cost which has already been absorbed within that area is 20 million or thereabouts. It's difficult to estimate exactly, as James was saying earlier. In the event that the scheme was immediately cancelled, that would be a cost which we could not capitalise, therefore we would need to write it off into the revenue account.
Right. So you're saying, when I asked you the direct question, you're saying yes.
Yes.
The £20 million would go into the revenue account. Yeah. Right, I'm going to stop it there, because I'm quite clear in my mind what the situation is. Roger, we're going to have a look at your alternative budget.
Can I ask you, please, Chairman?
Yeah.
On the agenda, it says the medium-term financial plan as Appendix 1, in my budget as Appendix 2. Are we not going to look at the budget that's been put forward by the Cabinet? Are we not going to scrutinise that at all, anywhere in this council, before it goes to council in March? There's been no scrutiny of the Cabinet proposals of £50 million savings anywhere in this council. Cabinet brought it forward, adopted it, gone in for public consultation. There are many think that it does not comply with the gunning principle, because I think the word review appears in that. I did make a note here how many times it appears. The word review appears in it 27 times. How can a member of the public or even a councillor who is not in the Cabinet make any comments on the budget when it's review? There's a target operating model which is saving £11 million with no identification or anything like that, and it's not been subject to any scrutiny or any discussion in any meeting that I've been at. since it was published by the Cabinet.
Okay, so my understanding about this whole process is that the opposition group would come up with their alternative budgets, having looked at and examined the medium-term financial strategy. So I would have thought the alternative budgets would have taken into account the medium-term financial strategy, and your alternative budget would reflect any changes that you wish to make within the medium-term financial strategy. That is my understanding. Gwilym's the cabinet member here. Would you like to?
Yes, and I do appreciate this is the first year that we've actually done this actual process. However, I have to say that I was surprised when I got to see the alternative budgets, because I was expecting it to say something along the line, saving line 23, X, Y, and Z, 100,000. We don't want to do this. We want to do this instead, which is exactly what Roger is saying. But there was none of that was put forward. It was all we have in front of us is a wish list of further expenditure. So I'm a bit bemused that the whole point of the alternative budget is to see our budget, say, well, we don't like that, we don't like that, we don't like that, but we understand the revenue position. So instead of making those savings, make these savings, if that makes sense. And I haven't seen that, so it's something we need to take back.
Yeah. So Roger, do you want to discuss your alternative budget proposals?
I do want to discuss my alternative proposals, because this paper will be going to Cabinet for them to consider. Cabinet control the expenditure of this council, so its Cabinet can take any of these proposals on forward, look at what they have and the information they have. I haven't. As I have said, I don't know what review means. I don't know what the target operating model means. I don't know if there is any expenditure. I do not know how the government announcement on December the 21st on the settlement has affected this council. It's reputed in the media that I read that this council, or the average for local authorities, is they're getting 9% more money than they originally expected. Is there any of that revenue? I haven't got a clue. And that's where I come from, that I would like to scrutinise the Cabinet budget to see where it is, what it is, where the money is, whether we would support any of that proposals or not propose it, whether any of that money could be used for this alternative budget. I have not put forward any alternatives because I have not got a clue of what the Cabinet is proposing. They are review, efficiency this, efficiency that. They're capitalising vacancies. I don't know about those vacancies, whether I would agree those vacancies could be capitalised, whether those vacancies could be deleted and that money saved, which is what it says in this budget that is on the agenda for today.
So this whole process was agreed last year. I don't know anything about the financial settlement, but I would think it would be very amazing if we got much more money. So the administration came up with the medium-term financial plan, and that is what you should be basing your alternative budgets on, is the plan we've actually got in place, because we've got the settlement. I don't know when the figures will be released, but we've got to take our budget to council on the 1st of March, haven't we, Gwen? Second March. I don't know if you want to say anything at that juncture.
Yeah. I can, to a certain extent, understand Councillor Evans' angst, but we have said at Cabinet previously, when we see that term review, and if we say, for example, green waste or parking or such like, where it is a policy change, there will be a whole paper coming to Cabinet and there will be a whole debate. It might be a green paper, it may well be a normal process, and through that process it may end up coming back to you at scrutiny on each regular review if it's not existing policy. In relation to the settlement, I'll remind Councillor Evans of his confirmation of my comments regarding the perilous state the general fund balance and our reserves could be in moving forward. And if there is any increase in settlement, that is where they'll be going, other than ring fence money that the government is saying where we've got to spend it on. Because we need to get this council into a sustainable position over this next 12, 18 months. And then if we're lucky enough to get a healthy general account and some reserves back in, then we can properly look at these alternative budgets and policy making decisions moving forward, because we'll be in a sustainable position.
Right, thank you, Graham. Julia had a hand up.
Yeah, so just a couple of queries really. So
Yeah.
firstly, couldn't we just ask James Walton today to tell us about the settlement? That's the first thing. The second thing, I raised this quite vociferously at Cabinet when you presented your budget. I was really quite clear that the timescales didn't seem to make sense, that you were presenting a budget to be passed for the financial year beginning in April, which included cuts, let's call them what they are. And yet you were explaining that where they were a review, a change in policy, that a lengthy process would then take place, consulting with service users that would come back to scrutiny. And I said I couldn't understand how those two things could coincide. How can you pass the budget for the financial year that begins on the 1st of April? How can you pass that on the 2nd of March and tell us that going into the future, you will consult on whether or not you cut them? If you recall, that was my question at the time. And it's still my question, because no matter the outcome of that, it can't affect the whole year. So that's my second point. My third point, I think, just to say that it sounds that we have perhaps misunderstood, or perhaps it's because it's the first time we are doing this process that we're learning as we go. But all three of the opposition parties have assumed the same approach. So we have assumed that we are putting forward what we would do if we were in your position, i.e. receiving the information that you receive and putting forward what we would do next. None of us have used the same process to also criticise what you have put forward. We thought they were two separate exercises, that we have comments about your proposals and that separately we have our proposals. The fact that all three of us have done the same thing shows you that we collectively haven't had the same understanding of this process. So therefore, there needs to be another moment where we do get to discuss those savings again.
Can I just bring James in, you just, or Ben, just to give us a brief overview about the settlement? Have you got that crystal ball, have you, James?
So there's a few things in there that we need to discuss, and Ben will come in a second. But in terms of the settlement, and I think Councillor Butler stated this as well. The settlement didn't come in until I think it was the 19th. It was 19th or 21st of December, I can't remember. So it came after Cabinet had approved the medium-term financial strategy. Unfortunately, that's the way this works. That's the way it always works. And we have to have a consultation period on the budget to enable us to get 6 weeks in, which is as part of our constitution. So we have to get Cabinet to approve a budget at that point in time, but it's always a little bit crystal ball gazing, because we don't know what the settlement looks like. The difference this year is that the budget that's been put forward and proposed by Cabinet was very much about taking one of our key strategic objectives in the Shropshire Plan, that we would align our resources around the Shropshire Plan. So the setup, the arrangement, the plan that we set out was that we would be reviewing what we do as an organisation and ensuring that we align our resources around our priorities within the Shropshire Plan. So I accept the point that review doesn't give a lot of information in one sense, but it is wrong to change the word review to cut, because that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about reviewing the service, and yes, if that leads to an efficiency saving, that's exactly what it is. If we're saying we're going to change the way in which that service is delivered, i.e. you used to get 10 off them, now you get 5, that's a cut. If we're saying you still get 10 but you get them in a different way, that's an efficiency review. So maybe the things are being delivered in a different way, but they are ultimately the outcomes that we are seeking to achieve are still being due to be achieved, and the way in which we deliver that will be in a different way. If as part of that there would be a significant change to service users, that would require us to consider producing an impact assessment, or if there were things in there that required us to consult, we will identify those as we go through the process, and we will deal with that. So that's the plan. The settlement came in. The settlement looks like it is more positive than we had originally anticipated. So what do we do with that? So we're in a slightly better financial position, we think, although we still don't have the final settlement. That's not due out until February time or later this month, depending on when that comes through. So we've got the final settlement to come. And things can change between the provisional settlement and the final settlement. So we're not going to count all our eggs at this point in time. On top of that, we have the consultation, which we need to take into account, and we also have further work that we're doing through the budget generally. So at this point in time, and the other part about the settlement covers a series of funding elements for the council. It doesn't cover every single one. So there are other parts of the grants, other assumptions that we are currently still making that we won't know until later in the year what that means. So we don't want to be overly risk averse here, but we're talking about big chunks of money here. So it's not a time to be to just be making lots and lots of assumptions. So settlement came in slightly better than we anticipated. So what do we do? So do we say, well, okay, we had a plan. The plan was aligned to the Shropshire plan, but now we've got a bit more money. We do something different. Or do we say the plan is what the plan is? However, picking up Councillor Butley's points, if we there are risks associated with the plan, and there are timing issues, and there are considerations such as this will require a change in policy, and therefore we'll need to go back to Cabinet, Council, etc., for a further decision, consultation, etc., etc. So if we can use this additional funding, as Councillor Butler suggested, to A, put money into a contingency, into reserves that enable us to cover off some of those issues, but also to de-risk the plan. So the delivery of that plan, if things take slightly longer, if things take a slightly different term, we can de-risk that element. That's where we would put that money. What we wouldn't do is change the plan per se. So that's the approach with the settlement, and I think that covers off a number of the points. But Ben,
have you got anything else you want to pick up?
Yeah, so a couple of things. Thank you, Chair. I think agree with what James just said around the settlement. I think there's a couple of points I can add, which maybe kind of clarify some of the sort of answers and responses to the questions being raised by the councillors. The vast majority of what's being talked about in the settlement is to do with revenue. And the 9.2% headline figure, which does relate to the average across all councils, that's not what we've received. We've received less than that. But even at that level, the level of the savings gap, which was identified and is set out in the December MTFS papers that you've got copies of, that wouldn't solve the £50 million problem in the council's accounts, which is solved through the proposal set out and attached to the December MTFS. Just around some of those proposals, I think it's worth noting that we took time to try to expand upon the descriptions included within the December MTFS, noting the comments from councillors around, was this sufficient? Could we provide some additional descriptions? So we went through prior to launching the budget consultation. The details are all exactly the same as within the December MTFS, but the descriptions have been expanded as much as possible. It is difficult, however. Review does have a particular meaning, just as James has explained, and within the context in which we are trying to provide greater efficiency, therefore greater value for money for residents. It's not the case that you can look through the details and try to find the areas where it is a specific cut, so to speak. Those aren't in there. Otherwise, I would want to be flagging it in that way. The proposals that are coming forward are clearly badged around specific areas where we are seeking to drive greater efficiency. And the efficiency is a kind of well understood term within sort of the way finance and business works more generally. To the point around the gunning principles, and I'm just going back through and having a look at the original alternative budget proposal paper. I think there's just 4 gunning principles which are set out. We're just working through them. The proposals are still at a formative stage, which is correct. So I think that principle is met. there is sufficient time to give quotes intelligent consideration. I think that's a judgment, and I think it's a difficult one to judge. In my professional opinion, I think there is sufficient information to give intelligent consideration to the proposals, on the basis that, by comparison with alternative council engagement processes, which are also set out in the same paper which went through Cabinet and then Council, there has been considerable opportunity for councillors and members of the public to engage with the proposals that have been set out. To date, the interim information that I have is that we have 158 completed responses to the budget consultation survey, which is better than last year. So clearly there's at least 158 people in Shropshire or around Shropshire who felt able to comment effectively on it, and that that sort of sufficiency of the information was met. The time and for the third consideration, which is the third guiding principle around adequacy of the time and consideration of the response. I think, as James has just flagged, the timing of this is never ideal because of the way that the settlement comes out, because of the need to agree a balanced budget in order to put forward the proposals around council tax and get the council tax bills out, which will not function at all as a council. It is always a very hectic period through October, November, December and into January. And that's just the case. But within that, we have given time for consideration and response. The December MTFS has got detailed budget proposals, which is somewhat in advance of some other councils. So that does give an opportunity to do that and puts us in a position. And lastly, there's conscientious consideration to be given to the consultation responses before a decision is made. That's built into the process, and that will be fed through into the way in which the budget consultation and the alternative budget proposals are going to be considered by Cabinet. So to the gunning principles challenge, which I think is an entirely reasonable and appropriate challenge, my personal professional opinion around this would be to say that actually it seems to me that there is a very strong case to be made by the council to say those gunning principles have been met. So I think it is difficult around that. I think that the last point I wanted to make was that in terms of the expectation of the process and whether or not the opposition group leaders have properly interpreted and understood, if you like, the ask of the process. I did endeavour to make clear in the early briefing around this process that the kind of the expectation was that there was a set of budgetary proposals and that things would be taken out, changed, and alternatives would be put in. So effectively, you're kind of taking a line in the budget proposal set out by the administration, changing those, and that could be to do with, I don't know, something which is important to kind of your electorate, if I can put it in that way. Could be around car parking charges, could be around waste collection, could be around highways and roads, could be around social care, but something where there is a proposal which has been put forward. How could that be changed and done in a different way such that it was more in line with your political aspirations? So I did try to make that point. If it didn't land in quite the correct manner, I think, Chair, apologies to those concerned, but I did endeavour to make sure that was understood by the councillors as we started out.
And can I just come back and ask a question? I did have a conversation with you, and my recollection of the conversation was that you said this alternative budget process was one of the most generous processes that you've experienced at the council you've worked at.
In my experience, it's a good one, and I think the evidence of that is set out in the original paper. There's 4 alternative versions to that. One of the least generous, just to compare with it. It's just one of them is undertaken very, very early. So maybe with Councillor Buckley's points around a much earlier and much longer length of time through which we could consider those. But it would mean engaging in July, August or September thematically where there were no clear proposals yet to be considered. So I think that you can go early with less information, you can go much later with more information, but then you have more difficulty with the timetable. It's never going to be perfect. I think this is one of the better processes that I've seen.
Yeah. So this is fairly new. Everything else, this is exactly the same as it always is. But we really have tried to engage, I feel, and we want to go through your alternative budgets because if there is anything with any merit, Portfolio has said they will consider it.
Chair, can we just complete the point on the preliminary statement? Could that be shared with us? Is there a reason why we're not allowed to know what the figure is? Because that would obviously make a big difference.
The information is in the public domain in relation to what's on the gov.uk website in terms of what the settlement is for each of the organisations. The analysis behind that will feed into the next MTFS. So absolutely, you can see that information, but that's readily available.
Right, and I think the thing is interpreting the information, which if the information had been interpreted, then obviously we have it. Roger.
Yeah, I did ask officers to give some indication on what the government statement pre-Christmas said, and the information that I was fed, and that's why I feel that the budget that we put forward could be satisfied, was that we were getting, and it was all approximate, and we've got to wait for the February settlement. All right, it was about £1 million better off on the government estimate of council tax. The business rates looked like we were going to be £7 million better off. Inflation to be honoured 3%. Inflation better funding varies between 4% and 9% for the different authorities. So there was more revenue coming into this council than we thought. And if you look at my budget, our budget, the actual revenue costs is £20.85 million. £20 million we've talked about earlier on, the North West Relief Road. So it's £850,000 extra revenue costs is included in the budget what we put forward. I totally dispute £750,000 of that, because I think that is just appropriate officer guessing it and just putting it in. And that's with the ANPR cameras, and they put a £750,000 revenue cost in the 23-24 budget. I would guess it's going to be no more than 50,000 for 23-24. It may end up at that in future years, but we've got to go through the road traffic orders, get the agreements, do the consultation. It hasn't even started that. That's going to take 6-9 months on any of them. So to put £750,000 of revenue costs for the ANPR camera settlement there outside schools just doesn't really, in reality for me, and I did raise that question with the officers that who were being advised of us, that I just didn't recognise that figure. I didn't see 750,000 until it was made public. Up until then, there was a lower figure there, and I still disputed it then. So if you look at 20.85 million in the revenue, £20 million is the North West Relief Road, 850,000, £750,000 of that is to do with the item on the ANPR cameras outside schools, which is item 11. Cost of providing ANPR cameras outside those primary schools, £5.3 million capital, £750,000. That's £750,000 shouldn't be there. To be confirmed, whatever. So there is very little revenue cost in the budget that we put forward.
Right, thank you, Roger. So, I'm going to suggest that you actually go through your alternative budget proposals, Roger, if you would like to. I'm well aware of the time, so would you like to, or?
Yeah, I'm willing to go to, Chairman. I would like it to go to the Cabinet for them to consider it and maybe bring forward with what I think would be a better improvements for the residents of Shropshire. And no doubt my other colleagues would as well.
We are where we are, and we have got the information that has been supplied to us. We haven't got crystal balls, so we're going to look at what's in front of us. So are you going to start off, Roger?
Yeah, I would like to do the Cabinet one, but obviously I'm not going to be allowed to. So looking at our budget, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah.
All to do with the same sort of thing. But if I pick out one especially, there is the press are picking up and the media are picking up the lack of beds and the residents that are in our acute hospitals, which could go out. That is to address that there. There is a Bishop Castle Community Hospital there, which has been empty for more than 12 months. And there is a proposal there, and I would like to take that to Cabinet for them to have a look at it to do an investigation to see what's there. There are capital costs included. There's no revenue consequence because you don't know what it means, but we think it will provide more beds in the south and the north of the county where they are needed. I'm being told there are enough beds in Shropshire, but at the present time in the south and the north, there seems to be a perceived lack of them. So that is what that is about. There's words there. I can add more to it, but looking at the time, I would like Cabinet to have a look at it. Going down there, list of capital projects.
Can we, I think possibly the best way to deal with it, because I've asked Rachel to come into the meeting and she has got other things to do. So if we look at the first four, because I think those are the only ones really where we need Rachel's input, I think, in your budget. So if we could deal with those and then we can let Rachel go to her, Tanya, the first bit, and Rachel as well,
Thanks, Roger. This has already been to HASC in terms of the market development plan. So we are working with the market and looking at the need in terms of care home capacity across north, central and south. Our strategy remains to support people at home, and since 2016 we've seen a reduction of 15% of people going into residential and nursing care and 23% more people being supported in the community, and that's been our firm position. And really pleased to sit here as your DAS to say that we're one of the best local authorities in the country in terms of supporting people in their own home. Because if I ask people in this room, put your hands up if you're aspiring to go and live in a care home, or do you want to actually continue your days at home? And I think I know what the answer would be. So, you know, my officers alongside me were working alongside our market position statement, looking at the need in terms of Shropshire. But our position is clear in that we'll always try and support people in their own home rather than residential and nursing care. I think later on we'll talk about additional extra care, and we do have extra care in Shropshire. However, the people that are coming out of hospital are so complex and are unwell that if they can't go home with the care package, then they will go into a nursing placement. And so at the moment, we'll always look at options in terms of extra care, but we don't believe any new developments of extra care would bring an impact in terms of our budget position for 23-24. Rachel will just touch on the Bishop's Castle area.
Yeah, thank you. So just to say, I think in terms of the Bishop's Castle, at the hospital site, it's complex because although there's the ownership of the land, but then there's the ownership of the buildings themselves, and there's different uses and different people that lease and own the land. So the community trust particularly owns some of the buildings. So all of that would have to be taken into consideration in any work that needs to happen on the site. It's an important site, and in terms of having some of those conversations about the use of the site going forward, using information and consultations with local organisations, that has to be there, I think, through the ICS. This has been raised as a question at HASC and will be brought back through HASC. And we have had confirmation that there are initial conversations taking place about the use of the Bishop's Castle Hospital site, excuse my words. And so there have been some very possible initial conversations, but no detailed plans as yet, and that will be brought back through and involving stakeholders and partners. So I think around the actual site, the use of the Bishop's Castle Hospital site, it's slightly more complex because of the use and the ownership, and it needs to involve a range of partners in that conversation, led through the ICS and the hospital. But those conversations are underway as we understand it, and they'll be brought back through HASC as well.
Okay. Gotcha.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, what we're saying is it could happen. It could happen. That's what it's there for. It's a project for the future. This I would have called is a budget for the future, a budget for the people. So it's there. There's no revenue consequences because it is something that I am aware is being discussed. I'm also aware, as a director, is that there is one example in the south of the county where one person was discharged to a hotel with no microwave and all sorts of disabilities. And I'm grateful that it was taken on board and it's being sorted. But hospitals are discharging people without the appropriate means in place for them to do it. So it is ideal for them to be discharged to their own home with all the support that is necessary. And I congratulate the work that is being done. But the more beds that can be released in the acute hospitals, the better. And that's the idea behind this. So if I go on to the next one.
Yep.
Which is the list of capital projects. That is for noting, because I must admit, I was amazed to see that there is no capital put against the shopping centres, for example. Council voted to put some capital in, but I'm told it is only a provision. And it says we currently. I've jumped.
You're at number 10 now.
I'm jumped. If I come to 6, all right. List of capital projects, total and value of each that can be achieved to spend on active travel schemes. You'll see that it is there as a possibility. We may do more investigation and take forward an amendment to the budget at the council meeting. Because the idea of this to me was that we could send projected projects to the cabinet for them to look at it. When it is presented at the March the 2nd meeting, at that meeting, we would have to show appropriate revenue savings elsewhere to actually pay for any costs that was there, because it has to be a balanced budget at the March meeting. At present, and it goes back to the conversation a while ago, that these were possibilities that we're asking the cabinet to investigate, using officers between the cabinet meeting next week, when it is presented, and the actual February cabinet, when they produce the finalised budget to be presented to council. That was my interpretation of the alternative budget proposals. Go on to the next one.
Right, Gwynn.
Sorry, Chairman, I thought I was presenting it here to the Scrutiny Committee. There's been a refusal to allow us to scrutinise the cabinet one. But you're scrutinising this one now, and what I'm proposing is that it be sent to cabinet with appropriate proposals. I'm not asking Councillor Butler for comments. He can make the comments at the cabinet meeting or anything
so
like
Roger,
that.
I'm chairing this meeting, okay? And I have asked Councillor Butler to speak.
Yeah,
I've tried to be patient, and what I've tried to do is so that we can all listen to what you've got to say and hopefully recognise some merits in some of it to take forward to cabinet. But anyway, Gwynn, you wanted to say something.
Perhaps ask Ben or James to come in if I've got the process wrong. But the whole point of today was to present those amendments to our MTFS. So we would then take, if we were as an administration happy to take some of those amendments, we would take them to the cabinet meeting in February, discuss them and approve or not, and then they would go to March. The March council meeting will not be the time to bring amendments to the budget. That is today. Now I'll ask Ben and James to correct me if I'm wrong.
Would you just like to clarify the exact situation, either of you, Ben?
I'm happy to speak to that. I think there is a process which has operated in previous years. We've sought to put in place a changed process to enable better a process to enable the alternative budget process proposals to come forward. That was set out in the paper, I think, last summer to cabinet. That was agreed by full council, I think, in September. So yes, I agree with Gordon's point that this is the opportunity to be setting some of that out, and then it can go forward in the way that William was describing.
Okay, thank you. Right, Roger.
Introduce a working place levy. This, I think, is an idea which should be explored. Other cities and towns have introduced it. It is a means of funding both park and ride and local transport without hitting the pocket of the individual who wanting to use it. It could be used to reduce the cost of the park and ride, for example, into Shrewsbury, or reduce fares elsewhere in Shropshire to improve the bus services for it, which would then meet climate change reduce pollution in Shrewsbury, if we could encourage more people to use the park and ride. There are all sorts there. And I'm sorry, we may well produce an amendment to the budget in March. That is per the Constitution. And I was amazed to hear that we're being told that we can't take an amendment to the budget in March. I would almost certainly bet there will be. But that is what that is. It is an investigation for the future on there, which has been introduced in many towns, and it is there to reduce congestion into towns and improve or encourage workers to actually use the park and ride. And they could have a free ticket, they could have whatever to do it. I go on to the next one. Introduction of just one bin. I must admit, and I've said elsewhere in other meetings, I'm amazed at that, because if one looks at the estimated cost assumptions and everything like this, it assumes that the only cost would be communication and behaviour change. So in essence, that whole line tells me that we can use the purple bin for dry recyclables, paper, tin, plastic, everything. It does not say there is any financial penalty or problems if that was introduced. I've since been told it will, but in that there, it doesn't. Completely blank all the way through. Nil revenue cost, net nil. Capital is completely blank. And at the end, it says if a new bin would be introduced, it would cost around about £3 million. So I just don't know why we're not doing it now, according to that information.
Yeah.
Item 9.
Yeah. Can I just say, Roger, because you've been around quite a while, I think obviously, you know, we used to compost our cardboard and we couldn't do it because of the sellotape and everything on it. So we can't actually put paper in with the recycling, and that was part of the issue and part of the reason why we got the purple bin. So I don't know why nobody flagged that up to you, but they didn't. Ben, did you just want to say anything?
Thank you, Chair. Just to clarify, the proposal that's been set out was to repurpose the purple lidded bins. Exactly as Councillor Evans has just set out, that could be done with no cost impact, clearly. The difficulty around it, which was flagged through that part of the process in which we sought advice on the proposals from the relevant service areas, is that currently the contracts that we have in place in the council aren't amenable. So those suppliers, those contractors who collect they take the recycled waste, we have to separate it in the way we do because of the way the contracts work. So that putting all of those different things into the same bin isn't something we can do straight away, because it wouldn't be collected by the people that want to take the recyclers off us. And my understanding is that kind of reflects a wider position in the market. It's actually quite difficult to get the contractor in place to do what it is that Councillor Evans would like to do. I don't, from a professional perspective, I don't really see a problem around the proposal. The difficulty is that the market is not amenable to that proposal at the current time.
Okay, and it's a shame that wasn't put in there. Okay, sorry, carry on, Roger.
Item 8 withdrawn. Item 9 is just for noting a prompt. I would think that the result of that may result in amendments to the budget in March, but I'll leave that on the table at this moment in time. Item 10, Riverside, which is the one I was talking about there, it says is net nil capital. Council, in an exempt paper, I think, did agree some capital to put work on Pride Hill and the Riverside Centre, but apparently it was only just in case it was wanted. Okay. Item 11, AMPR cameras, outside schools, capital, and there's the £750,000, which I totally dispute. I don't know where that figure came from. It might be the ultimate cost for the 23-24 budget. I would, as I say, it's got to be introduced before there's a revenue consequence. So I don't know where that figure, so I just leave that on the table there. I think it would be a lot cheaper than doing all the work that is at present being carried out on a pilot project outside some of our schools. I represent Longdon Division. Hanwood is part of it. Hanwood School is on the main road through it. We have an AMPR camera in that village that the parish council has paid for to try and reduce the speed. And in December, there was 210,000 vehicle movements through the village. That's 2.5 million vehicle movements per year through that village, which is quite a big number, with a primary school sitting on the main road and no proposals yet to introduce any sort of speed restrictions outside it, just a 30-mile-an-hour speed limit. Parish council is looking at it and they're going to have to pay it again, I think, because Shropshire Council is just failing to do it. It's there, the money I dispute. Street lights, I noted, proposal put in 2017 to put street lights into LED ones, ignored. We're still there. I'm glad to see that it's been advanced now to March 24. I would still urge the Cabinet to take it as fast forward as possible. I see there's £1.9 million in capital, I think, going towards the street lights to be spent in 23-24. Item 13, government statement making grants. I think that speaks for itself. We should be doing it. And in fact, some of my colleagues say that we should up that to £4 million. So I would urgently look at Cabinet, ask Cabinet to actually look at that. I note that we give money already to do the grant. I think it needs to be improved. Item 14, reinstate the skip offer. Had another look at that since I've talked to officers, and maybe the way to take it further forward is to maybe have a roster of having a skip on the urban estate for an hour at a time, when it can be manned and then moved to another part of the estate, which would then reduce the cost of implementing it. There's £100,000 there. Okay, is that what it's cost? We may be able to reduce that by just spending an hour here and an hour there, and not having it on every Saturday morning, we'll say, or anything like this. So it is wanted by many areas in the appropriate estates where it would work. 10 village safety limits there. That one, I just do not know what's happened to it. And I'll refer to 2017 again. Hanwood, one of my villages, we do have speeding problems. WSP did a survey in 2017 and came forward with possibilities on how to reduce speed through the village. It was on the top of the list for village speed enhancements to slow it down. 2017, the report was presented by WSP. Disappeared from the programme because of other priorities, never been reinstated. The initial comments that I had when that was put forward from officers was, it's still in the programme. I said, please, if it's still in the programme, show me the line in the budgets. There isn't one. So it's capital there. I would again urge the Cabinet to look at that and look at capital, because projects for villages is wanted throughout Shropshire. Traffic speed is increasing. Hanwood, Ponsbury, Minsterley. I've worked with Councillor Nick Higgins, and we've introduced our own AMPRs, and we're working with the police and the Police and Crime Commissioner, and letters are going out to people who speed past those cameras. We've taken it on board. I wish Shropshire Council would. 16, how many households are now required to pay? I noted, disagree with it, and many authorities do not charge what it says there. But we will pursue that in other areas at other times. Number of empty homes, we would want that 6 to 10 year periods brought forward. So whenever it is legal to do it, and I need to chase up with Willem, Cabinet and others to see that this 300%, we need to bring houses back into occupation. But there is a need, I feel, for an appeal panel. And it was noted in the last meetings, and it's noted in the minutes of that meeting to say that there was an appeal system needed to be set up for those young couples who buy a house which has been empty for a number of years. They want to do some work, and then suddenly they're told they've got to pay 300% council tax, which they hadn't budgeted for. So there needs to be, as I say, some sort of appeal with members or whatever to do it. And it should be taken away from officers. It should be a member decision. And I would hope that that could be taken on board by the Cabinet. 18, cost of providing loan, and I think Councillor Vadmer would come on and give my voice a rest, and you.
Thanks, Roger. 18 is very much to do with the proposal from the to have a health hub in Shrewsbury, which will include 6 surgeries and all diagnostic services. And we'll all know about the opposition to that. It's been all parts opposed to it in Shrewsbury. And the proposal here is to look at the capital side of it, because one in consultation with NHS managers locally, it is clear that they don't have the capital resources to actually do anything other than the hub. And if for example, we're funding and helping to fund the Paul Moss Centre there, and if we could actually investigate whether we can actually help to fund GP, for example, in Shrewsbury, 1 or 2 GP practices, I'm sure, would prefer not to go into a hub, but perhaps have improvements in their own surgeries. That can't be provided under the current regime within the NHS. Similarly, we might want to go for more than one, for example, diagnostic hubs. Again, and it'd be interesting to investigate those sort of ideas with the NHS locally. Obviously, this is something which it doesn't involve any extra expenditure or any cuts, but it's very much a way in which I think we could investigate and just sort of help solve what seems to be an impasse within Shrewsbury between proposals from the NHS and the views of local people.
So I'm going to just stop you there a minute and get some advice from Ben, because I don't think even if we wanted to, we'd be allowed to do that. I think it's probably illegal, but anyway, I'll pass that over to Ben.
Thank you, Chair. So I understand the gist of the proposal that's been forward. The idea that we borrow within the prudential borrowing rules, which all councils operate within, and then on lend, is a very tricky one. We have to be clear as to whether or not we're actually acting in the mode of a bank, which we're not allowed to do. Lending into another public sector agency is particularly difficult, and it's not something I would advise. It is possible in some ways. I know how we can share revenue. I don't know if there's also a similar route for sharing capital. What I would say is that the ICS and local NHS organisations and the NHS as a whole has an enormous capital budget, capital fund, and there is a bidding process through that. What I have seen sometimes in my experience of working with the NHS on some of these matters is that the status of GPs as self-employed or sort of commercial businesses in their own right is part of the reason why this is a difficulty. So I think I understand the objective. I understand the difficulty that is being faced around meeting some of those local needs. I'm not sure this would be a safe route forward in financial terms for the council to go. Having said that, we could take further advice, or if it was necessary and Cabinet were interested in pursuing this, we could easily get that advice from the Treasury Management advisors that we have retained, Link, who will be able to provide some further detail on that. I suspect, however, it is difficult to say the least.
With the Paul Moss Centre, it's in its capital budget, isn't it? Funding for the.
But the way in which that is then,
why couldn't that a similar scheme be set up for either a diagnostic centre or a
The difficulty is that many of those services are services which only the NHS is allowed to provide.
I mean, personally, I think it's a really, really dangerous precedent to set.
But it's already been set in by church.
Well, I disagree with you. Anyway, if you'd like to carry on, Roger.
Okay, item 20, again, I think it speaks for itself, and there has been recent press comment, media comment over the weekend. There, people are starting to dump their electric cars because there's no charging points or anything like that. I want to encourage people to stop off in Shrewsbury on their way to Wales or anywhere else. Park up for a few hours, spend some money, spend some time in Shrewsbury or Shropshire, see what a good county it is, and we can improve our tourism and economic prospects. And hopefully, expectantly, it would be self-financing. The capital is there, and then the charge that would be made to actually charge these vehicles would do it. There was an interesting article in Saturday's Times, I think, where it says an editorial there where the person is looking to get rid of their electric car because they just fed up with actually doing it, and it was repeated in some of the Sunday papers. It speaks for itself. I think it just needs some capital investment there, which with no or very little revenue consequences. 21, again, it's there. I did raise the question about £45 million being spent on the Shirehall. Would not therefore be a capital saving if we did not need to build anything, a new civic centre in the town centre of Shrewsbury or anywhere else? We could continue using there, so there'd be some saving there as well. But I'm told that there is no knowledge, expectations at present about what sort of civic centre would be needed if the Shirehall wasn't here. Population-wise, and there is no estimates at this moment in time of what a replacement for the Shirehall would cost. That would automatically, of course, come off that £45 million. It wouldn't be 45 million, it would be less than that because of the savings that would be made. Thank you, Chairman, that's me finished.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yes, Chris.
Thank you. Well, I don't know whether it's just me sitting around the table, but it seems that none of these alternative budget proposals are funded. So are we scrutinising a wish list?
If I can, Chairman, most of them are capital. And again, I asked the question of officers, how much, I use the word spare capital, unallocated capital is there. And the answer that I got is that there is capital available. We would fund capital projects as they are selected and agreed by the Cabinet and Council, and if necessary, we will go to the Public Works Loan Board for it. If one looks at the budget, which I'm not allowed to talk about, there is £450 million worth of capital projects there in that over the next few years, of which there's about £90 million which are unfunded at present and would need to go to the Public Loan Board for it. So I would suggest that can be added to that with it. And if a previous leader of the council said that there was over £150 million at that time available to invest to save, and he was prepared to go out to the Public Loan Board to invest elsewhere if the project was viable and it helped Shropshire residents. So the Public Loan Board can do it as per the Cabinet proposals that is there. There's £90 million already in that budget, which is unfunded. Public Works Loan Board, it is estimated. Thank you, Chairman.
Right, thank you. Just a couple of comments, really. I'm not stopping you talking about the medium-term financial strategy, Roger. You can talk about it for the next hour if you like. In my conversation with Ben, I asked him the question about borrowing, and what he said to me, and he was quite clear, if we want to, we would never borrow money because we're doing a project next year. We would have to put a business case forward for any particular capital expenditure we want to make, because that's prudent. Is that correct? Yeah. So I don't know if there's any other comments you want to make before we move on, James?
Just quickly, it's really just to reiterate that point, within the capital strategy, there are a number of capital programmes that have been identified as part of the strategy. Those are not funded. They are only funded when they move into the capital programme. And in the capital programme, any borrowing has a revenue implication, and that revenue implication has to then be built into the medium-term financial strategy. There are a number of items within the capital strategy which are unfunded. To identify what the implications would be if we had to borrow, that's identified. But the reality is that we will be looking for external funding for a lot of those to be progressed. So Cabinet spent a lot of time, and Councillor Butler will be able to update if you wish to, but you talked about this last year. A lot of time was spent by Cabinet prioritising the capital programme so that what went into the capital programme was affordable and the revenue implications of that were built in. The capital strategy then picks up other wider areas which are at the moment not funded and not built into the capital plan, not into built into the capital programme. And at the moment, the assumption is that additional funding, external funding, would be used rather than public works loan board as a funding mechanism.
Chairman, can I follow up on that quickly? And that is that if we take the charging project which is there, which is £5 million, I would hope that we maybe find external partners. If we got the land in a car park, there may be external partners who may want to come in and actually provide some of the capital. I haven't queried it, but as James says, you can go to other providers who may be able to do it, and it could be done in partnership. So that capital there of £5 million could come down, but it would be up to, if that project was agreed, to actually find a partner, identify one, and see what contribution. And there are various other ones in it which could also be included in it.
Is that to do with the charging?
It is, yeah.
What I was going to say, and I didn't want to stop you when you're in full flow, but I think the problem is that at the moment it's costing the same to charge your car with electric as it is to fit with petrol, and that's a real problem. I do agree with you in some ways. I think if there's a need, the private sector will always fill it. So there are opportunities for private companies to come forward and provide the charging machines. But obviously they're only going to do it if they make money. And that's the balance. Where we are at the moment, it's the same price as the fuel. So that's a difficulty for us. Robert.
Can I just come back to Roger? Just ask, obviously, I've got a bit of experience with SIL, so I'm just going to come back on that item. That comment. You've got SIL current balance retained and potential use to offset other capital costs. But I was looking at it and I was kind of trying to think, are you talking about other ones of these schemes you've listed as that being a potential source of funding? Or obviously there's restrictions around what SIL can be spent on. And there's a very sort of public process in place now through the place plans and place plan reviews where the communities put together the priorities and then that leads where the money follows. I'm just conscious of, is this bypassing that by saying to them, you know what, we're going to put in schemes or we're going to pick which schemes rather than going through the next review process? Because I know my parish councils and others are all ready to sort of feed into that and say, well, actually, there's this much on balance. These are the ones we'd like progressing and so on. So I just wanted a bit more detail about that, really. Because obviously, if there were specific proposals, if they arrive at the time of budget, you wouldn't, one, we wouldn't know, or would potentially be hard to know if they're qualifying ones, and two, the community and others, it wouldn't be going through the process they've all agreed and are waiting for, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so Gwilym, did you want to speak before or after Roger?
Before, if I may.
Yeah, okay.
I do see Roger's point of view on the capital programme. Going on Rob's points about the SIL and the place plans. For example, if we took the Bishop's Castle situation and the desires for Bishop's Castle, I've always said that we will look at any capital programme through the due process. So if they were to put their need for what they think Bishop Castle need as a priority on their place plan, we would then go to the appropriate director executives, we would look at the data, we would understand the information, and then decide whether it supports a business case. If it did get to the stage of supporting a business case, we would then know what the capital spend and the revenue implications are, and at that stage, you could bring it into an alternative budget. or get it into the budget. It's a process.
Roger, you wanted to just come back.
It's still active discussion on that. I well understand SIL and its association.
You must be the only one. Roger.
No, I understand what was adopted when Sandef was there, and there's many parish councils who still work on that proviso. Village safety schemes are an example, and I can quote you villages which have put bids in to SIL. They have employed their own consultants to enable that bid to go into SIL, and they've been waiting a year, 18 months to get any answers to come up when they have development in their villages. And they are getting very frustrated, and they are thinking about putting requests in anyway. And as a local member, I'm happy to push those forward, divorce from the group. And Rob will know and be aware that there's been a hiatus of SIL requests for some time, and there's been very few agreed with the villages and local communities, and there is a real frustration built up out there because of what is happening and the perceived need to do further inspection on how to go forward with SIL. So it was interesting to see there's £90 million left in SIL, and one of my hobby horses for some time is the Shrewsbury local place plan, which covers a third of Shropshire. A third of Shropshire by one place plan. When you look at other place plans, which cover might be 10, 12, 15,000 residents, whereas we cover nearly 100,000 residents in the Shrewsbury place plan, which means that it's really hard to do it.
Yeah,
and
can I stop
I've
you there? I've got sympathy with you, Roger, because I'm in that same place plan, but it's not really a budgetary issue. So I'm just going to ask Rob, because Rob wants to speak, and then I think we're going to wrap up. Perhaps have 5 minutes so that we can have go to use the facilities, and then we'll start with the Labour alternative.
I suppose that was going to be my only question really, is does that fund form part of the budget process per se? Because it has a separate mechanism for making decisions and reporting how the money's going to be spent and so on. So I'm just conscious, otherwise you're going to have every local member picking out the projects from their place plan and bringing everything to the budget, when actually what you're saying, if you're saying the process is slow or it isn't working and so on, it's kind of, that's where I'd see it. That's how I understand it, is the fund would work differently to the main budget process. You know the money's there. There's a separate budgetary process for assigning it, because it can't be transferred to another heading. James is nodding at me, so I'm hoping I've got that right. But that was, I was just conscious. That's why I thought I just wanted to get clear so that we can't use that.
And I think, you know, we're going to have conversations outside of about all that, Roger. So if we're happy to stop for 5 minutes so that we can just use the facilities before we start. You happy with that, Julia? Yeah, so we just have literally 5 minutes just to run down the corridor and back.
No, you're absolutely right. I'll give you the budget.
Think of
Sorry, the vaping thing.
Translation documents.
Did you ask about vaping?
Yeah.
Sorry. No, but,
I'm going to get a drink.
working on around.
very much. Welcome back, members. So we're going to continue the meeting now, and we're going to look at the Labour alternative budget proposals. Julia, would you like to?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you for this opportunity. I want to just repeat what we said earlier, which is that all of the opposition parties have taken the same approach, which is that we thought we were presenting our proposals in the same way that the administration had. So we didn't understand that you also wanted our critique in here of yours. So just to explain, that's why they're not in the same document. And also, just to answer Councillor Schofield's point before he makes it about the £20 million revenue deficit, the reason that we had that preliminary discussion about the North West Relief Road is because I, and I'm sure the other opposition parties too, have a different view about what would happen if we cancelled the North West Relief Road. So our view is that we would go ahead with the Oxford Relief Road. It's written into the statement at point number 1, our first proposal. And currently, so far, the split of funding is 7 million to Oxford Relief and 13.9 to the North West Relief Road. So even today, that figure should at the very least say 13.9 million, not 7. But the point really, which I think Councillor Evans made really well, is that by progressing with the Oxford Relief Road, we can still capitalise much of that preparatory work because we can cost it against the Oxford Relief Road but still reap the benefits. So on that basis, if I were able to publish this report, I would say that there would not be a £20 million revenue there. I would say that we would capitalise the work on the Oxford Relief Road, and that would not be as is written here. The other thing I'd like to say is that, as you know, is last year's spend or this year's spend on the Relief Road, and what we're actually talking about is next year's budget. As Councillor Evans said, there is currently £10 million on the books to spend on next year's North West Relief Road. You'll be aware that 75% of that comes from grant funding, so only 2.5 million of that commitment is Shropshire Council. Our proposal is to decommit that 2.5 million. We would not progress with the road. And so that provides us on the books with 2.5 million. So as you scroll down, we'll come to our capital proposal, which is 2020, which would cost 2 million. So if we were able to describe this in the way that we would like to, that is what we would put in terms of the bottom line for that. So if I can just run through, you'll see really the theme throughout all of this is that the Labour Party's position is not, we're not really in favour of these sort of risky commercial property investments. That's not our style. We would prefer to use investments to invest in people. So whether that be the staff at the council or in the most vulnerable in society or services that would support them. And we think that some changes to the way that those services are delivered or changes to the way that we employ or pay staff might also produce savings or income. And we've got some longer term investments as well around environmental projects, which again, we feel would generate income or savings. So most of the things on our balance sheet are either net cost, nil, or actually generate income. So coming back to Councillor Butler, I hope that you will consider each of them separately in that vein, because if even one of these is cost neutral or brings a benefit to the council, you can put politics to one side, you can happily steal our policy, just like the National Conservatives do, and we will very happily let you take it forward if it can benefit either this council or the residents. So, number 1, I think we've been through it, it's cancelling the North West Relief Road. We would continue with the Oxon Link, excuse me. We understand that that means we absorb current costs in the way that I've described. We dispute that we would have to pay back a future grant of 58 million. I've asked for a copy of the grant funding agreement to be absolutely sure, but clawback, the word is in the meaning is in the word, you pay back money that you've received in the past, not money in the future, because the grant funder recycles that forwards. So while there might be a cost to exit the legal agreement, there would not be, in my opinion, we would not have to pay back the full value of the grant. We would certainly be released from the commitment which the council currently has, which is to pay 100% of every pound that goes over the original cost. That will release us from those commitments.
Sorry, Julia. just for a bit of clarity here, you're talking about 58 million. Nobody's talked about 58 million.
It's in the budget. It's written in here. If you look at column 1B, it was written in there that there could be a clawback of 58 million. That's future grant, which we just wouldn't receive. So we wouldn't.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. No.
Explaining that we don't, we present this in a different way, but we were unable to type that in there. So I'm just explaining why we have a different approach.
Okay. And whilst I've stopped you there, would you, so you've got a couple of questions here, 2 and 3. Would you like me to bring in the officers when if you talk
Yeah,
about number
just
two,
put-
and then I'll bring the
yeah,
officers
yeah.
in? Yeah.
Yeah, so on to
Okay.
number 2 then.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
So our proposal around number 2. So the concern we have around the current issue with social workers is there is currently an overspend in the authority of over £1 million. We think it's £1.3 million, where we're having to pay agency, which is obviously an extra 100% of the cost, above and beyond employing them directly. So the actual saving of our proposal is much greater than what is written here. What is written here is the saving as to achieve the base budget, but your current year is 1.3 million over the base budget. So if you were to go ahead with proposal 2, it will save 1.3 million plus what's written here is nil on what you're currently spending on agency spend. And the reason is, as you can see, is that it's unpredicted and was unplanned for. Because we were unable to retain staff here, because other neighbouring authorities are paying a different rate and providing different conditions, we're hemorrhaging some staff and we're having to react to that. This proposal, I appreciate the administration has some similar proposals, so we are aware of that and we appreciate the work that you've done. I think that we're trying to go further and trying to be more proactive up front. So it might feel like we're asking you to pay more money or go further than you're ready to. But we feel by being proactive up front and particularly negotiating an arrangement with partners, a bit like you've done around fostering, where you'd have a commitment with partners to all be on that same benchmark, we feel that that would give more certainty. So you would know at the start of the financial year that you are holding on to these staff and that they don't not just want to stay, but they want to come here. So that's where we're coming from with that one. But happy to take comments, questions.
Yep. Okay, Tanya.
Thank you. And we wouldn't disagree with those comments. So we have a welcome payment for all our new starters here at Shropshire Council. A retention payment for qualified social workers now in its third cycle, and it's really popular in retaining our qualified social workers in the children's social care space. Our turnover rate remains low, and we're kind of the third lowest in our grouping. We agree our spend and agency spend is high, and we're actively working about how we reduce that. We're really proud that here at Shropshire we've got a number of agency social workers that like working for us and have worked with us for some time because of our support and our training offer. We've been having some really positive conversations with those agency staff alongside our HR and finance colleagues to talk to them about the package that we offer here at Shropshire. And I'm really pleased to say that we've been able to convert some of those agency social workers to become permanent social workers at Shropshire Council, which is really positive. And in fact, we're at the lowest point of our agency in Shropshire for some time, with a plan to reduce down to 20. However, the point that's been made in terms of how much we pay our social workers is different now to our neighbouring local authorities, because they've increased their rate of pay over the last 12 months. So we are working on a draft paper in terms of a market forces paper, but that can't just be for children's social workers, because rightly so, I would be criticised by other colleagues in terms of adult social workers. So we are working on a paper, myself and finance, in terms of how we can make that happen.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you. I think that sounds really positive. It doesn't
Yeah.
sound like we're particularly far apart. Even though we don't say children's, we mean social workers, we mean across the board. And I think it's really welcome to hear that ad hoc work is happening on an individual basis. But just as you're talking about in the Green Paper, we feel that a more systemic approach will give you that certainty up front, and it will not just retain the staff we have, but it will attract new staff. So even with all the positive things you've described, we were still £1.3 million over this year. And so there needs to be that step change, doesn't there, to avoid that next year? Because just as you've described, it's not just what we're doing, it's about how we are situated with our partners, isn't it? And that partnership working. I think the model you've got for have I used the wrong word, fostering, or the adoption agency, where we've got a commitment, haven't we, with our partner, the neighbouring authorities, we've all agreed the same rates. Something like that could protect us from future sort of arms race.
There's an MOU already in place for agency social workers, but because other local are struggling so much to recruit social workers, that MOU unfortunately is not working in the region, and it's up for quite a debate now within the region about what we do next. Nationally, and I'm really pleased to see this, that the DCS network alongside Department for Education are thinking about how can we ensure that social workers are employed by local authorities and not through an agency, And we're hoping that the government will come out with an announcement imminently about that, because we want our workers working for local authorities, because they don't get any more money, but as we know, it's the agencies that want to pocket it.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you pretty much agree with us on that one, Tanya. We'll take your endorsement on our
I
policy.
think as Kirsty Hess-Knight said at last cabinet, you know, we were working really strongly in terms of our offer and our model in terms of social work practice here at Shropshire.
Yes, and Gwynn.
Very briefly, because I was very interested when you put this forward, and under due diligence, Julia, I went to Sam Williams HR to actually look at some comparables across our region of pay scales, and we are definitely in the middle, if not creeping up to the higher quartile of our competitors. And my view would be is we're actually covering this, so I think we're on the same page. How we actually get to the end delivery can perhaps come back to scrutiny at another time.
Yeah, okay, and I think you know, I'm struggling to get performance indicators, but certainly one of the performance indicators I'd like to look at. And I don't like political point scoring on something like this. I think it's something that we're all committed to, and we need to work together. So, you know, I don't think there should be smugness over any particular aspect of it. Right then, so
just back to your performance indicator, ratio of council employee to agency staff could be a really useful indicator to keep us focused on that.
Yeah, and I think as well that we have to look at it. We can't look at it in isolation. We have to compare it to other local authorities. I think because we are known as a good employer, so that helps as well.
But having an overspend of 1.3 million is another indicator that we haven't cracked this. And when we are today looking at budget, where we can save money or where we can do things more efficiently, we have to say, whatever we're overspending by that scale, we haven't solved it yet. We need to be more radical.
I think in fairness though, Julia, going back on that one, I have looked into this, and we're in no different position than a lot of other authorities. That is that is the real situation. So I think it's a bit disingenuous to say we've got, or Tanya's got a 1.3 budget shortfall when actually she's in no different position than any of your counterparts.
But today is not about other council budgets. Today is about
I agree.
Improve our budget. If this could improve our budget and our service delivery, I think we're all committed to that.
But I don't think that we can improve to such a statement. We're the only council in the country that doesn't have agency workers.
Nobody has said that, but we're today looking at ways we can improve that, and this is one of those ways.
Yeah. With respect, I think the demand that we've faced this last year has brought this about, which nobody could have predicted.
Well, and I think it's across the piece, and I think we know worse than any authority. We want to be top of the pile. I think that's the thing, but we have to have realistic expectations.
We have been looking at this scrutiny, so
we look forward to the green paper.
We've got our first, we've got our 7-degree apprenticeships graduating next month, and we'll be celebrating together at Full Council. I've invited them with the chairman approval.
Chair, could I just briefly say, I think on this one, we're pretty much on the same page.
We
both want the same outcome, and we'll
Just
work to get there somehow or
We
another.
look forward to the green paper. We can
Absolutely.
Okay, shall we move on then?
Thank you.
So number 3, it's a similar approach, isn't it? So we are concerned about the lack of educational psychologists that are currently available to schools when children have special needs. So currently, if your child in a school is struggling with special needs, you have to wait up to a year before an educational psychologist is available to write the report. The report is a bit like a gateway, which then releases funding to support that child. So the reason for the delay is because we're understaffed. There's a shortage of educational psychologists. And you might think that that speeding up the psychology report will then increase demand and increase cost of spend for support, but it's actually the inverse, because the sooner the support is provided, the cheaper, the quicker and the shorter term it is, because it can solve the problem sooner. And we currently have a situation where families who are struggling, because they're waiting a year just to be assessed, they're falling into worse and worse situations. The child is becoming more and more acute. I'm sure you understand there's quite a large overlap between children who struggle with special needs and families that might be in challenging circumstances. So you've really got families that are struggling in lots of different ways. The other thing to say is, where you have this problem, it's not just that one child in the class that then suffers. If they're not receiving additional support, the teacher's time is then distracted and all the other 29 kids are all suffering because the child's not getting the help. So our view is that we could employ 2 additional educational psychologists across the county. We put in the cost, market salary plus the on cost, and we feel that because they would release the early intervention, that would in fact save money by not waiting for it to become acute and more expensive. And that's reflected in the service response, which said this would be a net nil cost because it would reduce service delivery. Just front loading support to save you money, but to help those people earlier.
Yeah, I think we've got actually, I think the position's changed quite considerably, Julia. I don't know if Tanya wants to just update on that.
Yeah, thank you. So increasing our educational psychologist capacity has been a priority, and we've increased from 9.9 full-time equivalents in January 2020 to 15 full-time equivalents in November 2022. As it currently stands, there are currently no education healthcare needs assessment requests without an allocated educational psychologist, and the majority of these assessments continue to be completed within the statutory 6-week timeline.
So as you know, it's not just the ECHPs that require the assessments, is it? It's also the IEPs, so the earlier independent education and learning plans. So that the ECHP is the very severe child that needs the high level of intervention. The IEP, it's sort of the starter grade, if you like. It's that first observation, the early intervention. And for us, that's where the gap is. The gap is around the early spotted problems. The gap is not around the acute care. We're hoping providing early support might actually prevent demand for the acute care. So what are the timescales, please, on the IEP ED reports?
I don't have that information.
Because our intelligence is that there are delays, very long delays.
Certainly can provide that, not a problem. Yeah. And just to add to that, we've been increasing our core support offer to schools via grant funding from a dedicated schools avoidance pathway. And we've got a really exciting session with our schools coming up. So we've had one in November. We've got a further session coming up, which is going to be free of charge to our schools. And hopefully that will start to address some of that kind of early pathway issue that you're raising, Councillor Buckley. But we'll absolutely get that figure to the committee, not a problem.
And this is sort of unrelated, so I shouldn't really ask it. But do the delays with CAMS, does this back up and does this make the situation worse? Because I think possibly this might be a scrutiny item, to look at this whole thing. What do you think about that idea? Because I think that might be helpful.
We know there's a number of children waiting for diagnosis that has been discussed at the People's Committee.
Yeah.
And remains an ongoing issue, as has been highlighted by our recent SEND revisit inspection.
Okay, thank you.
So I appreciate the extra information from Tanya, but I think we need to come back to this proposal. Our proposal is that by increasing by 2 further education psychologists, we're able to provide the early assessments, that's for the IEPs, which we believe will save money from the acute provision. So really what we want to hear from you is whether you welcome that and whether you can see, according to the figures that we were given back, that would be a net cost because it would reduce service delivery. And it's about whether you feel this additional support at the early stage would be appropriate or welcome.
We haven't actually asked the question though, so you haven't got the answer to the question, have you? So it's difficult to comment, I'd say. But
yeah, so I guess we're looking at to overcome the current delays in appropriate EHCPs due to the lack of ed psych is the response that I've kind of provided in that we have increased our capacity to ensure that we are meeting our statutory requirements with ECHPs. But I think the further question is around the earlier help, of which we can get the data and have a look at that.
Yeah, so I think, I don't think that Tanya can commit herself to that. I think we're going to have to take that to scrutiny.
Happy to do that.
So once we get the figures back, it might then be useful for us to understand how that plays out. Can we move on to number 4?
Yep, thank you.
Okay, so this one, we were provided with the costs. So the proposal is that either within or alongside Cornwall Development, we'd like to set up a new team. The team would be specialists in retrofitting, particularly older buildings, to help them become more energy efficient. So they would access funding from Marsh's Energy Agency. They would focus, for example, on council buildings, so they would reduce our overhead costs. But they would also be a traded service, either to partners or to developers or interested parties in Shropshire who could pay for those services because it's effectively investor sales, isn't it? They could retrofit old buildings and generate longer term cost savings on energy bills. So we really needed two figures in order to be able to present this proposal. We needed to know the cost of setting up and running that team, which we felt would more or less mirror the team that currently runs Cornovy, and so we've been given that mirror cost there, 250,000. That's the revenue cost per year. What we don't have, there's a bit of a gap, as you can see, is the benefits that would generate. What is the estimated benefit to the council in reducing our own overheads in terms of trading this service and in terms of accessing Marsh's Energy Agency grants? So I would echo Councillor Roger Evans' comments, which is that, you know, that we've had support from Ben to help us put together the proposals, but we haven't necessarily had the detailed figures that we would have hoped for that could have populated this chart. So with permission, I'd like to, and Ben's suggestion, I'd like to get similar figures from other authorities that do this, so that we can prove to you, show you the economic benefits of this kind of service.
And I think what I'd like to do with this one is I will talk about this at Cabinet and see how, you know, we do need to look into it further and ask Cabinet. I don't know who would be the person who would.
It'd be Dean Carroll and Mark Barrow.
Yeah, so I
would advise on it, I think.
Certainly ask that. Robert.
I just said the Housing Supervisory Board has gone through this and had these debates at the business plan stage each year as well.
Yeah.
And pretty much it was flagged the difficulties of doing this, and that's why nobody else. That's why there isn't a big person we can just go to and say, come in and do this in Shropshire for us. But certainly we're happy if Cabinet are going to look at it. The Housing Supervisory Board certainly, you know, Councillor Dean has been particularly keen on this previously to look at, so we can offer any assistance through that.
And you're on the Housing Supervisory Board.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
yes, really welcome, isn't it? Because you're really recognising there is a gap there. And while Marsh's Energy Agency have funding and sort of theoretical specialists, the gap is exactly, isn't it, around those qualified specialists in the retrofit. And we can all see the tsunami coming of the deadline by which buildings need to be compliant and the energy bills going up. So it's another one of these that the earlier we could act, we would have the specialists, we would be able to do things before costs go up, or at least explore the trade-offs of doing that. So you're really welcome to work with the Housing Board. Just have a look, sound it out.
And I think, you know, I think that's really helpful, and we certainly take that.
Just quickly, Chair, if I may, it's a huge moving feast at the moment.
Yeah.
Government have just announced funding for bands A to D, irrespective of benefits.
Yeah.
You know, and I know they already have a list of competent suppliers people can use, and what hoops Cornovy would have to jump through to become on that list would be another debate. So, but in theory.
But I'm not just talking about householders here, so I'm talking about our buildings and our partners' buildings, businesses.
Yeah.
But you've hit the nail on the head. There are not enough qualified, accredited specialists, and they are now in ever increasing demand. So if we don't get enough to support us in our own buildings and our partners, we will never get them.
Yeah, it's across the board with trades.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Well, thank you. So I move on to the next
yeah,
one.
please, yeah. Thank
Okay, so this is another one where we've got the idea, but we don't have the missing piece of information which we did request from the department. So we would like to explore generating renewable energy on a council-owned or leased asset, very specifically to put it on a building where it could be used immediately at source in real time. So what we wanted to find out was, could we have a list of the council-owned buildings, assets or leased properties, sort of ranked, if you like, by the size of their energy bill. So we want to know which is the biggest energy consuming building or asset the council owns or leases. And it was not to be confused with, which some people thought we meant, which was the largest building, because you've already got solar panels on Shirehall. Shirehall might be the largest square foot, but it is not the highest energy use. It's only open Monday to Friday. It's only 2 floors in use. If you go to the council-owned care home or young people's home or the swimming pool at Quarry Bank, then you're talking about 25 degrees, 7 days a week. So it's about the temperature and it's about the hours of use rather than the square foot. So once we have that list, we're going to be looking at the top 5 and investigating which of those could be potential for renewable energy creation, in particular solar panels, because it can be done quickly. And the reason for this is to use the energy as it's created at source in real time has 4 times the value than when you draw it down and save it in a battery or feed it back into the grid. And so for this reason, this particular project could pay back within the same year. It would pay back the instalment cost within the year and would reduce, either generate income or saving, however you wish to describe it, going forwards. But we've been told that the list of the energy bills of this council does not exist and it cannot be given to me. So neither assets nor the environment team can provide me with a list of the energy bills of council-owned buildings. So for that reason, you cannot know the return on investment or viability of our proposal.
Can I just say a couple of things there, Judith? The first thing is, I think the quarry pool, you wouldn't be able to put solar panels on the roof anyway, because the roof would probably cave in. And I think that's probably true of quite a few. And I think possibly a policy whereby any new builds or, you know, looking at every building that we own to actually put them on. But what I'd like to see, and this isn't about an alternative budget, this is about planning policy, if you like, is that every new industrial building we build should have solar panels on it. You know, I'm absolutely clear about that, but that isn't to do with the alternative budget, I agree. But
so just to be clear, the difference about this is very specifically targeting high energy use because it has 4 times the value. So back to your point, any survey report would immediately check the structural possibility of the roof or the car park or the best location. But the point is specifically around high energy use and how we can either reduce consumption or generate energy on the site of the highest use. So I've tried a different way to try and get the information, and perhaps once we have that list and we can get that information, perhaps this then becomes something of interest for us to explore.
And maybe this is again, maybe this is a scrutiny item. I don't know. Gwyneth, you wanted to say something?
In principle, again, I totally get what Councillor Buckley is saying. If my memory is right, when we actually proposed to put solar panels on Shirehall many moons ago, that was done as part of looking at our whole assets and where we could put them.
Exactly.
And where it would have been suitable.
Exactly.
And there was lots of areas with the quarry, it's the suitability of the roof plus the fact you're in a conservation area. So there's all sorts of hoops to go through. I would have thought we would have looked at it previously.
Yeah, okay.
But without talking to somebody from assets, I wouldn't be aware. For example, the electricity bill for the quarry pool would be paid by the provider of the service and not by us, I would believe.
Yeah, I don't know.
So
I don't know.
But if that piece of work has been done, which I agree with you, Willem, I'm very sure that it has been. It would be quite simple.
We perhaps need to update it.
Or we can just use that as a starting point.
Absolutely.
I could at least have a look at that list and understand
it's a job for
which ones have been done or not. So there's an information gap here, isn't there?
I ain't got a problem with it.
Yeah, we just need the information, don't we, to progress that further. It's unfortunate.
We want to get it if we haven't got it.
Yeah, but it's unfortunate that we haven't been given it, so that today I could have explained to you a real life example.
Or not, because we've already done it.
It could have eliminated it, and we could have all saved 10 minutes of our life.
I know we're chilling, but we can do it through the chair.
Okay.
And we will put this to scrutiny. Okay, so I think you're moving on to number 7.
Yeah, number 6 was a duplicate. So number 7, the idea here is that some properties might be having extensions or increasing the size of their property, which may or may not then push them into a higher council tax band. But we're not clear whether the planning team and building regs control who oversee that, whether they are in touch with the council tax team to ensure that the two are joining up. And we're suggesting an additional member of staff, and that this would be their job really, to sort of double check when a property is extended in size, just to make sure that if this tips them into a high council tax band, that they therefore be rebanded and costed accordingly. And we feel that this would easily pay for itself, that they would find a couple, we think, each week. So we think it would provide slightly more than is written there. And we would want to use that for one of our later proposals, which is around a council tax freeze for those in the smallest properties, A and Bs, those on benefits. What we're really saying is, if you can afford to extend your home into a much bigger property, we feel that you should at least be paying the council tax that's due. And with that additional tax, we want to use it for a council tax freeze for those who can least afford it.
Right, okay, so I did ask Benjay about this, and basically what Benjay said to me was that if you have a big extension, then and you sell your house, they can put the charges up straight away. But if you do a big extension and live in it for the next 20 years, the district valuer will not increase the level of council tax payment. If you want to explain that in a more technical way, that's about it, isn't it, Ben?
It is about it.
Yeah.
Sorry. And Chair, that's it. Until the sale goes through, you can't change the collection level. And if it's just inhabited, we identify these, and there are a number of officers already doing this work. But you can't do it on the basis that somebody is enjoying the benefit of that investment they've made in the property. You can only do it legally from the point where it's sold, and therefore the valuation office advice then comes through at that point.
Yeah. So it's out of our hands as well, Julian. Yeah.
And what mechanism do we have in place to ensure that when it is sold, that one of our officers remembers that that was one that had an extension and now needs redoing? How is it joined up?
I presume it is, because they said that they are aware of it. But
So just this is part of the ongoing work of the Revenues and Benefits team. They're able to include notes across all of the 148,000 properties that are billed for council tax purposes. We've got that all on the Northgate system, and we're able to maintain that those notes as we do with other areas, and it's done in a transparent way.
I'm not clear. So if I sold my house tomorrow, the first you'd hear about it is when the name changes on my council tax bill. So why would that officer know I had an extension done 15 years ago? And why would that? Who would that alert? I don't understand how it is currently joined up, and I fear that it isn't.
I think the answer is probably, Julie, we're going to have to go away and come back to you with a specific answer on that.
I mean, just to give
Yes,
an
James.
overview, we have the visiting officers that go out and they view these properties, and as Ben says, they make the note on the system. So the change in name on the council tax bill comes from the staff that are using the Northgate system. So that alteration would then be sent through to the valuation office. So you don't just get your bill straight off; it would then be valued, and then the bill would be issued. So, but even if that took several months later, it would still then be backdated to the point at which the property change was made. Well, counter legislation was built around the old rate system not being updated in a regular way. So what the government did at the time was, we are going to change, houses will be reviewed at the point of sale. That way, there is a mechanism to make sure that the council tax base is always updated on a kind of an ad hoc basis.
So really, if I've understood, it's not in any way related to the extension. It's in fact, when any house is sold, its new value is communicated to the council tax team, to the valuer team, and they communicate the new council tax band to the team. It's not, in fact, although it may stem from an extension, it's not actually related to that at all. It's just related to the value it was sold at on the day.
It's based on the visiting officers going around and identifying these things. If a visiting officer hasn't identified an extension, there would be no change. That's the way this works. Visiting officer will go around and will be looking at all of these properties on a regular basis to see where changes have been made, where new properties are built in, etc. All of that goes to the valuation office for them to consider. It's in our interest to ensure that every property is being revalued where appropriate, and that every property is on the council tax base. So any ones that are missed, or any breakdown in the process that you're suggesting may be there, is to our detriment. So we try to make sure that is being done, but it's down to the good work and due diligence of the team that does it.
Okay, if that's the case, then it seems that you've already completed this task. It's already the status quo, is what you're saying to me, in fact. In which case we can just move straight on. I think there's 2 left now. So item number 8, this is our capital investment. So if you recall at the start, our decommitment from the North West Relief Road this year would save this council's commitment of 2.5 million. We would spend 2 of it on this project and set aside the other £500,000. We had exactly the same proposal last year, which is a county-wide 20 is plenty scheme, so a 20-mile-an-hour signage scheme, so an installation of signage and traffic regulation orders for towns, villages in residential areas and around schools. All the evidence shows from other councils that have already done this that it's much more cost effective to do this across the whole area than to do it piecemeal and ad hoc as each area comes forward and requesting for the additional safety in their area. We wanted to put in the benefits in the costed area, but that's not been possible. Because the obvious benefits clearly are around reducing accidents and injury and fatalities. Of course, it is to humans and to the NHS budget, but there are in fact cost savings to the council. Obviously, we would save a lot of time and energy by avoiding all the individual requests. But also, where particularly larger lorries are travelling at 20 instead of 30 or 40, the damage to the roads is much less. So the problems we have with potholes, damage to road surface, pitting, that would in fact be reduced. And so there would also be a saving on our highways budget. So for us, this is a sort of proactive, upfront, county-wide investment that would improve communities, but we feel it would also generate some revenue savings as well for the council.
Okay. And your last one.
Okay. Yeah, so this really is in response to the cost of living crisis. It's a one-off proposal. Who knows what will happen next year? But we feel that the flat rate of council tax of 5% across the piece, the increase that you're proposing this year, we feel that that doesn't fall equally on different households. So, you know, if you're earning £1 million a year and I ask you to donate £1, you don't even notice it. If you're struggling on benefits as a single parent, I ask you for £1, it's much harder to find. And the disproportionate effect on people's experiences. So our view is that while some households may be easily able to afford the 5% increase you're proposing, we feel those that are the lowest economic households will really struggle. So we would target support at the residents of properties bands A and B, so the smallest properties, and we would target it further, so a subset of those, to those already in receipt of benefits. We were advised by Ben, very helpfully explained it would be simpler to make a flat payment rather than a percentage. It's easier for accountancy, and so the £70 is the approximate cost of doing that. So we're proposing a one-off rebate, if you like, of £70, which would neutralise the council tax increase for the worst off households. So any resident in receipt of benefit in properties A and B would have their council tax freezed this year. And you can see that as a net nil cost. So even within the authority, they're suggesting that that is affordable and payable.
Okay, thank you. Right, so do we have any comments from, or just want to get Burnham?
Yeah, on the last one, in theory, I can understand where Councillor Buckley is coming from, but obviously the 700,000 would have to be found because the 2.2 million savings is already in part of our 50.1. When you say in receipt of benefits, so if you've got somebody who is earning £50,000 a year and has child support allowance, or you have a pensioner in McCarthy and Stone apartment has a pension of £50,000, they will still get the £70. Or are you talking about people just on pension tax credit and universal credit?
Yes, so the statute
or on initial council tax support. Because I think where I'd like to go with this one, subject to clarification, is, as you know, I'm chair of the social task group looking at the cost of living crisis.
Yes, and you've got the hardship fund.
And we've got the hardship fund. Yeah. We have decided when we set that fund up that we as a council would not make any decisions regarding funding without it being a group decision of all the partners in that group. Because it may be a case that APK or CAB or somebody else or the poverty and hardship group come back to us and say, well, we might prefer to have that money over here into the hardship fund rather than put it into there. But the principle I agree with.
Yeah, I think they're valid points, and the different benefits have different purposes, don't they?
Yes.
And I agree with you. We're talking about what I call statutory benefits for those that are
And
below.
it's a moving feast as well, because the government's already come up with 25 quid, although we gave 50 quid last year, so there is a deficit of 25.
They are, but don't forget, these all households are subject to loads of increased costs on all
Absolutely.
sides. So payments from governments to help people with cost of living doesn't stop us from choosing to neutralise our own council tax increase, which is what this is doing, isn't it? It's saying we won't put an extra burden on you, and if the government want to give you £20 for your energy bill, that's also lovely, but really one doesn't negate the need for the other.
Okay, so
Let's see what the result of the
we'll send, you know,
Will you
obviously
update us on that?
cabinet
Yeah.
can look at that. Okay, thank you very much, Julia. I don't think anybody else wants to say anything this side. So, Duncan, are you still with us? You're still awake?
After dinner speak with me.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, thanks to Ben and thanks to you setting the process out. There have been some problems with it, but and hopefully we can learn from those as we move on into it next year. So we've tried to be fairly pragmatic and try to stick to the rules. So our first issue is around green waste. And if I just give a little bit of context as to why on earth we should focus on green waste. One of the things that you've said is that often we're faced with costs which every other council is faced with. Sometimes we have costs which no other councils are not faced with. And in terms of waste advisors, we are the second worst in the country. We collect more waste per head of house than every other council in the country, bar one. And we have to pay for that all to be disposed of. And that's entirely under our discretion. No government telling us to do that in a particular way. So here's an area where we are sticking out as having high costs. 2 years ago, I proposed very simply a waste minimisation strategy. That was thrown out, wasn't it? I think, we'd all recognise, I hope you recognise, that was a mistake. We've had a waste minimisation in the past. It was obviously sensible to try to seek to help people minimise their waste. We lost a golden opportunity then because we were rolling out bins. We could have rolled out a smaller bin for residual waste, but we didn't do that. And now we're faced with the fact that people are recycling more, but they've got this bloody great residual bin, which they can fill up with whatever they like. And that's one of the problems. So we are interested in looking at the issue of a green waste charge. It's ironic that you sort of throw out the waste minimisation policy because you're worried about green waste charges, but now you're looking at green waste charges, or we haven't got a waste minimisation policy to do all those other things, which could be less contentious and equally effective. Now, in order to look at the cost of that, what I did was to go and speak to some councils who've introduced a green waste charge recently. And one of them, it could have been anyone, but one recent I could speak to was Chester and West Cheshire Council, Conservative controlled, doesn't really matter. They have a similar population to us, and they tell me they save £2.5 million a year on their green waste charges. So I then put this through to Ben, and he put it out to his team, and the figure that comes back from our side is, well, we reckon we can save, what, about 600,000 a year. Where do you get that figure from? The figure just comes from some figures. They haven't got that from analysis of any other councils. They've got that from the officer putting some assumptions about takeout. If you look into, it's worth, I'm sorry to bore you, but if you look on my spreadsheet, in the fourth column, it's headed revenue. We've got the setup cost, 250k. You've got the gross income, that's on the charge of £1 million, and you've got a net benefit of 0.675. What's missing from that is the cost of the current service, because you're going to stop. Now, that's just the cost of the new service and the net income. What you also need to add on to that is the fact that you're no longer collecting from all those other households. And that's just not shown there. And there's one of the problems that I don't think the officers have quite got up to speed with providing the information that's required. And it's a sort of tale that you've heard from some of the other opposition groups as well. We've got to do better than that. I mean, I don't blame the officers because they're out there organising the collections, but it's between the finance department and the officers and the portfolio holder. Don't know the portfolio holder's spoken to other councils or not. We need a much more robust way of actually costing these things out. Because if it's only worth 600,000, you probably won't do it. If it's worth 2.5, I mean, Chester and West Cheshire is a very small area. Our costs are probably a great deal more than that because we're a massively large area. We've got all these vehicles running around this big area. So if our costs are £3 million a year, that's a big sum, isn't it? I don't know the answer to that. This doesn't tell me the answer to that. We would want to then use that to provide a limited free bus service between the major towns of Shropshire. And that's absolutely vital that we do something to address the continual decline of buses in this county, and also to do something to inspire people to no longer queue cars and rely upon cars, but to have a bus service which is free and reliable. They can start to attract new users into it. For example, obviously, town council made buses in our little town free on Saturdays, and it's been very, very popular. It changes people's perceptions. It gets them to use the bus. So that was a first proposal. I'll probably stop there, but I think the key, to my mind, that's come out of this is you're not getting the robust analysis of the data you need to make decisions.
Joyce.
Yeah, a very quick point. Oh, sorry, a very quick point, Duncan. You were saying about a bus service which is admirable, but as you know, that free bus service is now stopped because people stopped using it. Are you on about the Tannet Valley one?
No, I'm talking about the service within the town. Obviously, town council funds free bus services every Saturday, any bus that goes around the town. Yeah. And we've done that for a year and we'll continue to do it.
Okay.
It doesn't even Parish Council can do that. Shropshire Council can run a limited fee, but other councils are doing this across the country, are running just town to town to create the concept that there is an importance from a climate change point of view, important for economic generation, getting people to work, and important to get a whole new generation of people into buses and to rely upon buses, and we can go from there.
Okay,
Can I just ask one more question, Duncan? You're saying about the waste and us having a high amount of waste compared to other areas. Do you know why? Have you looked into why?
So I don't run the council, so I can only look at the figures and say I've identified savings from the area. I hope the portfolio holder would know why, because we've been at the top end for about 7 or 8 years now.
I think one of the, well, it's not for me to go into it now, and I'm sure Gwilym will have the answers because he used to have the portfolio as well. But we have higher waste because we're a rural county, more grass, more etc. etc. But anyway, I'll leave it there.
Okay, so we're going to park that one. Okay, so Duncan, you can carry on if you like with your proposals.
Well, I can do. I suppose you imagine some feedback to say yes, you'll support this going on to cabinet, or some feedback you wouldn't. It's a bit odd to have a complete blank or a question about Senate funding, which is a bit relevant. And we just proceed on.
I think people are starting to. I think people are starting to get a bit.
Yeah, Jan, can I just briefly comment?
Yeah.
I think my first comment would be that I'm pleased to see he supports our proposal of charging for green waste. My problem is that we need to understand that the 0.675 million is down as a revenue increase in our budget prediction moving forward. So your £6.675 million to spend on buses would have to be found from somewhere else. However, when the review of the green waste charges comes to cabinet, either green paper or cabinet or scrutiny, I haven't got a problem in looking at it in more detail to see where the land lies and how that would relate into the charge. But at the moment, I don't think it would be affordable. For example, just to give you some brief analogy, you say every market town to Shrewsbury, we subsidise the Ludlow to Kidderminster bus to, I think it's £70,000 a year at the moment, and people still have to pay a fiver. You know, how far is that 675,000 going to go? I don't think it will go very far. But again, that'd be something to look at when we review the green waste charging.
Right. Okay. Yes, I don't want to get too heavily into waste. Okay, James.
Not to go into it in any great detail, but just to say, in terms of the figures that have been put together here, my understanding was that this was about a low level assumed low level of take up and an assumed fairly low level of charging. The point made around the collection costs going is the bit that's not understood, because it depends on who doesn't have their bin collected. You've still got to go around all the same streets collecting one bin rather than three. You've still got the same sorts of levels of collection costs. So to understand what that looks like, what we've gone with here is a prudent figure. Now, I'm not going to suggest that the income could be significantly higher, but it could be higher once we understand that. And the point that Councillor Locker's making is, when we take this, if we take this forward as a proposal, that's where we would then look into that into more detail and start to map out what those would look like. But the assumption at the moment is that it would generate a minimum of £625,000.
Yes, you could be right.
And my issue is just due diligence. Speak to councils that have implemented it rather than sit in your office and try and guess figures on take up. Go and speak to some councils where they've implemented and see what the take up is there.
Yeah, Duncan,
Okay.
this is, yeah, I have made the comment earlier, you know, this is the first time we've done it. And, you know, I don't really like people being rude about officers. They've done their best, we've done our best. So I think we need to move on to number 2, please.
Yeah, I don't think that's been rude. I was just saying one way of ascertaining the cost is to speak to councils that have implemented it rather than actually try to work out assumptions without speaking to real world experience.
Yeah, okay. So number 2, please.
Okay. On car parking, we've got a situation where they say if you want to park in, say, Fankwell Navigate's car parks in Shrewsbury, you're paying one band. That band is actually a lower band than, say, the Festival Square car park in Oswestry and indeed several other car parks around the smaller towns. But the access you then get to a sort of commercial core of, 5 or 6 times Oswestry just seems out of proportion. I don't think anybody would think that was equitable. So I do think there's opportunities there to consider the rebanding of the Fankwell Navigate car parks, which I understand sit outside what was considered the retail core, but they're so blooming close to the retail core that most people don't understand that they just walk across the bridge and they're in the retail core, and that would release a 0.37 million. And that we would use to maintain the future of the Route 20 bus service into the future, and indeed other bus services which are threatened with termination as well. You can see there's a trend here, isn't it? We're rather keen on buses. And I don't think many people would feel that was completely unreasonable. You're not making those car park charges any higher than the ones within the loop, and you're given access to the services you get. I'm sure you would find that people would feel that was a reasonable compromise if they could keep the bus services.
Yeah, and I think Duncan, that should go forward to the parking strategy review, which is Gwillim's doing. I think that's the easiest way to do that. Let them have a look at it.
Just to say, Duncan, for clarity, we have a revenue increase as part of our savings proposal being delivered by the parking strategy. If you wanted to have income over and above that from the parking income to support your bus proposals, we would have to understand what the implication is on the increasing costs on those car parks. So it's something we could look at when we review the parking strategy, which will fall under Richard Marshall and the whole of Canada. Happy to take it back.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Thank you.
The third issue comes out of an Ofsted report, which looked at issues around children who've been exposed to domestic abuse. Now, it's very difficult to give what the savings are, but if you think about the children who we work with, we do have some difficulties at the moment enabling them to access the therapeutic services, which I would say every child has been exposed to domestic abuse will need, but certainly the vast majority will need, and that's because of the waiting list and the issues around the services. So the proposal is that we actually invest a very small sum of money, 150k, which the officers tell me would enable the council to offer such a service. I think you would see the dividends of that service in it being much more easy to place children who come into care, and indeed actually enable children to stay with their families because they're receiving the appropriate therapy at the appropriate time. I don't know, it's sort of a different issue, isn't it? But if you start to think about what it means to be a child brought up in a family affected by domestic abuse, one of your parents, who you look as your protectors, is actually abusive. The other one can't protect themselves, so they're not going to be able to protect you. Traumatically, psychologically, it's a very damaging environment for children to be brought up in, and I think this is a very small sum, and I think it would actually have savings. But I do appreciate it's hard to cost those.
Right, okay, so I'm going to get Tanya to come in on this one. And also, again, I think this is probably something that ought to go to Peggy's scrutiny.
Yeah.
Yep. But you go, Tanya.
Thank you. So looking back at the Ofsted report, what it actually told us in March 2022 was that some children have experienced significant issues with their mental and emotional well-being through the pandemic. Their needs in relation to this are not consistently well met by appropriate health provision. The local authority is mitigating the impact of this through spot purchase and a tailored support to meet individual children's needs and through its own provision. We have discussed this already at the People's Committee, haven't we, Peggy? And it's one that we need to ensure that it continues to be on our work programme. The council has invested significant money into stepping stones, as we know, this year, and that includes some element of therapeutic support for our children, to support them and their families to remain together. And if they do go to foster care, how we can continue to support them. But you're absolutely right, domestic abuse is a key priority for the Shropshire Safeguarding Partnership. You know the pressures in terms of children's social care, in terms of our spot placements, and we talked about the agency spend. Stepping Stones has already over-delivered in its first year, which is why we're able to triple that funding. So I think it's up for review in terms of Stepping Stones and that delivery, in terms of the impact of that service. But the domestic abuse specifically, I think it's something both for the People's Committee, but also for the partnership to consider alongside its health partners in terms of the wider offer for our children's emotional health and wellbeing.
Okay, are you happy with that?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Paul, we dealt with at length, I think.
Yeah.
So we'll go there.
Yeah.
Please, yeah. And number 5, I think, it touches on what Julia Buckley put forward as well, which is the provision of a capital provision. I would say actually today was a purchase house. I noticed a number of councils, several more recently, have actually gone out to and said we're interested in procuring houses, which we could use then insulate and use to meet housing need for homeless persons. And I've put SITs in there as well, because for those of us who have got any knowledge about what's happening with Ukrainians who are coming here, a number are now being placed in hotels, which given their trauma of their background and where they are, I think that's rather an unfortunate outcome. If we could find housing accommodation for them, and also for other people who are homeless as well, I'm not trying to make an exception out of them, I think that would be a very good thing to do. So it really builds on what's already been suggested.
Yeah, okay, and in fairness, we can work that in with what Julia said, and talk to Cornovi and Robert and other people and see what we can do. But actually, I think it's very sensible, Duncan, because we could absolutely wrap that in with number 6. I think it's a good idea. Okie dokie, do we have any more questions or anything?
No, I just said, I think this is part of the difficulty in taking on the points, because at one point or other, sort of Roger said, well, I don't think this figure's correct. I disagree with it. Julia disagreed with the thing. And I think that's the hard thing. Sitting here as a member, and by the time we get to the budget and so on, I'm kind of conscious of also some things, the smaller things you might say, okay, well, I can go out and get this and so on. Things like the North West Relief Road, there comes to a point where members are going to have to rely on the information that's presented to them. And whether they've managed to change the officers' minds on those figures or not, by the time I get to the budget, to a degree, I'm going to have to put faith in what's being presented to me on things like the North West Relief Road and so on. So I'm just sort of conscious, taking the comments before, building that into the process next year. It's how do people get to something that they can all agree on, or at least get there, if that makes sense? Because I know other members who won't be in here, they'll see the budget papers, they'll see the figure. That's what they've got to go on. That's what the public will expect them to base their decision on in terms of the budget. So
yeah. So yes, Chris.
I think that's a very good point that Robert makes, because otherwise, if you lose the confidence of the figures that are put before you by professional officials, then I think you went down a rocky road, personally.
Yeah, Julia and Roger.
Yeah, so I think that first discussion we had was really instrumental, wasn't it, in understanding the North West Relief Road and the Oxon Relief Road. And I think James Walton was very clear when we asked him, what would this authority do if you didn't get planning permission? He was very clear that there were lots of perfectly normal mechanisms within the revenue and within the reserves to resolve it. So this authority has all the normal mechanisms to resolve the consequences of not going ahead with the North West Relief Road. And as Councillor Evans said, if it really put a £20 million on deficit on the revenue, this authority would become bankrupt. So James was very clear, it wouldn't do that. It would be managed within the strategy. And that's what we're saying. We're actually saying two things. We're saying we would, if we ran this council, we would manage it in the same way that you would have to. But we're also saying, under the heading of the 20 million, only 14 of that is on the North West Relief Road, and that we think could capitalise more of the 7. So we're not just saying we don't believe it, we're saying actually, if you go into the detail and you take it to the next stage, there is a logic which follows that. And unfortunately for all parties, until you've actually secured planning permission, you have the same problem. Until you've got planning permission, you haven't got it. It's an absolute, it's like being pregnant or not pregnant. You haven't got it. Until you've got it, you are also have to prepare yourself for that £20 million gap, if that's really what it is. So we all have to work with those figures and understand the contingency around that. And I trust James completely that we would absorb that within the reserves and that we can capitalise what we can. That's what he was saying. And I
think I'm going to stop you there now, Julia, because I probably think you and James ought to go and have a coffee, because what you're saying is not what James was saying at all whatsoever. But I'm not going to sit here for another 20 minutes and naggle about all that. You can discuss that another time. Roger, and then I think Chris wanted to say. Yeah, you're all right.
Yeah.
Roger.
A fairly quick one, Chairman, and that is addressed to Gwilym and the Cabinet budget. Has any of the savings, whatever you want to call them, in the Cabinet budget been subject to a quality impact assessment? I've been asked, and I don't think they have. I thought before anything could be done, there should be. I don't know.
Yeah, can I just
briefly? It's part of the statutory process.
Yeah.
So it would have been done.
All I was going to say, Chair, was from my knowledge, if they're existing policy, that would have been done.
Yeah.
If it's something that's got to be reviewed, part of the review would take that into account.
Right.
But quick, if I can.
Hurry up then, Roger.
They are in the budget.
Yeah.
We as councillors will be asked to vote on that in March.
We're asking you to vote on the proposal that we do something. If it's not policy, we will review it at that time. We're asking you to start the agenda of reviewing the policy on a lot of it.
But with the situation with the revenue budget as such, we're agreeing a revenue budget with the assumptions that those savings will be made.
As we do every single year.
Right, okay,
Roger. It's not normally the scale, is it?
Julia, through the chair, that's it. Enough. Everyone be quiet. Right. I'm going to come up with a few recommendations here, because I think we've pretty much done with the meeting. One of the things that I'd like to do is I'd like, as chair of the Performance Management Committee, to write to the chair of HASC or HOSC to put some of the ideas that were put forward here onto their next agenda and open up some dialogue with the ICS and everybody, because I think together we've got to work these things out together, and we're all trying to get to the same place. So we all need to buckle down and do that. So that would be, I'd like to do that. Looking through what we've done today, I think Peggy's picked up two things for her scrutiny. I think it was Labour item number 3, and there's another one on one of the greens. Robert's got number 5, I think, the solar bit. Peggy was number 3 on the green list as well, so we've got those two to go there. Cabinet are going to look at, or I will ask them to look at the bit that came from the Green Party and also from Labour about Cornovy and looking at all those kind of things as well. And I think that's pretty much it. I think Gwilym picked up a bit about the parking strategy review. Is there anybody else who thinks we?
Could I make a comment, if I may, Chair?
If you brief, yes.
I'd just like to thank everybody for the involvement in this, because I think it's been quite a useful process. And what I'm actually seeing is, if we take a step backwards, we brought this process to PMSC twice in the summer. At the same time, I brought the MTFS, I think 3, maybe 4 times during the year, to expand on where we're going and what the issues were going to be. It almost feels, we'll always agree to differ on the North West Relief for entities, what it is, or what type of planning solution we go for. But it almost feels that this is the start of another process. It's almost a work programme now on policy and scrutiny. Some of the things that are very minor cost implications could be introduced if they are a recommendation from scrutiny and Cabinet accepts them. irrespective of party. But some of those things, like you're saying, Chair, of writing to HOSC and everything else, could be the platform for next year's budget, once we've got all that information. And so what I'm actually saying, this has been a useful process to actually gather information and possibly bring forward joint ideas once they've been fully developed to next year's budget. And I say that in the true spirit of openness.
Okay, thank you. So is everyone happy with what I just said before Willem spoke? Yeah, Julia and Roger.
I think you might have just missed the one about the council tax that Willem said he would take back to that.
Oh, yes, well, he
just went through a list and I was.
Yeah, he will look,
he
will look at that.
I didn't think that was a definitive list.
So Willem will
If
look
Ben
at
can
that
make a
one.
note to have a chat with Phil,
Yeah.
we'll have a meeting.
To endorse what you've said, I agree with you that it's focused our minds to be able to have a really specific debate about very specific proposals.
Yeah.
We could only do this once you have published.
What I'm wondering is, when we review the budget process with your chair, is sometime in the summer or early autumn, we look at the questions we've asked today
Yes.
and say, no, we couldn't do that.
Yeah.
Yes, that's going to go. That's going to have to be tweaked. Do you see where I'm going?
Yeah.
But we use it as an ongoing.
Yeah, and we certainly do that. Roger.
Yes, Chair. I would have hoped that there'd be a recommendation or ask Cabinet to investigate electrical vehicle charging points.
So what I was going to do on that one, Roger, I was going to speak on that particular one. I've got it highlighted in red. And I think two things. I think that the private sector will definitely be interested in picking it up. And also, we've just been awarded some levelling up money. So I was going to talk to Dean about it as well, because I think if we form a partnership with a firm or something, they might well be able to supply those charging points for us. So I haven't forgotten about it. It is there emblazoned in red across the
The
bottom.
existing round of funding we've had from government, the first tranche, was match funded to a certain extent from SIL,
Yeah.
because it is a county-wide initiative. And I believe there's further tranches coming down. But if there aren't further tranches coming down, Roger, we will look at it in more detail.
Yeah, because I think,
But as a result of today, I would hope that it can be taken forward for further investigation.
Yeah.
There is also about the workplace parking. That can be looked at and investigated. There's a single bin collections. I understand what was said during the meeting about when contract finishes and needs to be negotiated. There's house insulation grants, which has also been picked up by others. £2 million increase into £5 million.
Okay, so
those as well.
Okay, so in truth, we're pretty much toothless tigers in this committee, because this whole thing will go to cabinet. So cabinet will. Willem's been here. I think a lot of the cabinet members have listened, so they will pick up, I'm sure, on all these things. So you will be going to cabinet next week to put some of these things forward. I mean, they're all well aware, and
We
they
have the
listen to
alternative budget on the agenda for next week. What I would say perhaps to Roger is, where there are issues, and I think they're clearly good ideas to be debated, it is up to the chairs of scrutiny if they want to put them on their forward work programme.
Yeah.
That being the case, they can then make recommendations to cabinet to actually take a policy decision forward or not.
Yeah. Okay. Right, and I just want to thank everybody. It has been quite a process, and I think we've all learned a lot. And hopefully we'll polish it up a bit for next time.
Yeah, we'll review it.
But thank you very much, and I think it has been quite helpful having Gwilym at the last few meetings. I think that's been really, really helpful, and it I think it reassures us that the points that we've raised, cabinet will become aware of. So that's good. Thank you very much for Rachel, who had to change a lot of meetings to come, and also to Tanya and Ben. James always comes, but thank you anyway. So what I'm gonna do now is the call-in's next, but we've got to get the staff here to do the call-in. So I'm gonna have 10 minutes so that we can 10-minute break so that we can get all the people who are going to present the call-in. If that's all right. Work programme, I suggest we take that to the next meeting, because there's another meeting here at 2:00. So we just want 10 minutes. We'll come back and we'll do the call-in, if that's all right. Anyone can buy a sandwich. Julia.
Before we close, can we just record a note of thanks to the finance team? they've sort of been squeezed in the middle of us having lots of requests of information, and they then had to go out to other departments to ask them for information, which has been very difficult. I'm sure all of us have been, as you can hear, have been quite frustrated, but we don't want that frustration to be felt in the middle. I think that Ben and Cheryl and James have been very accommodating. You've heard there were some gaps, but it's not their fault. So could it also be noted that if we are doing this next year, that the resources need to be set aside in those other teams to feed through to the finance, so they're not put under pressure?
Right, okay, thank you. Roger?
Bringing it up now in anticipation of what may happen shortly, and that is the Acton Scott.
Yeah.
There are 4 reports, I think, on the agenda to be discussed on that. One of them is the public consultation.
Yeah.
I cannot understand why that is in the exempt part.
Okay,
Because
so
it stops any discussion outside of this meeting being held to do with that. And it was a public consultation, public meetings were held.
okay, so hold on a minute there. I've got
okay.
Graham
I'm
White
bringing it
is.
up now, you see.
Yeah, Graham White's on the screen. We'll just clear this up while you've mentioned it. Graham, could you show yourself? Thank you.
Hi,
So, I talked to Graham earlier, and he said that if the public consultation is the public consultation, I think it's on the website. Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, the public consultation, I understand, has been published already. It's included today as an appendix to the exempt report. Now, the exempt report is been recommended to be exempt because it contains information which could be sensitive. So that's why it's been included, and the public consultation is relevant to the exempt report. The information in the report remains exempt for as long as the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in releasing the information. So the report the contents of the report are still contain confidential information. I wouldn't expect that anything has changed from when it was considered by cabinet, because of course the call-in has prevented any finalisation of any kind of agreements. But Jane Trethewey is available to expand on that if necessary.
Yeah, okay, so I just wanted to get this out of the way because we're just going to have 10 minutes, Graham, because we've been at it since 10 o'clock. So basically what you're saying is public consultation is in the public domain and the public can see it. The
Yes.
other 3 papers are confidential and they will remain confidential.
Yep.
Right, Roger.
So can't we discuss the public consultation now to do with the Acton Scott?
No.
Why?
Okay, we'll have a vote, but I'm saying no.
Because
Anybody who wants to, hold on. Anybody who wants to look at the public consultation can look at it. Okay?
Sorry, Chairman, part of the call-in is to do with what the public perception is of Acton Scott. So it is very relevant to the actual call-in because it was consulted on there. So
Hold on.
that's the point. And I just cannot
Well,
understand
I don't.
why the Local Government Act now covers it and stops any
So
discussion.
I don't understand. I think it would stifle the debate if we debated the public consultation, because we would not be able to refer to the other 3 exempt documents. So we'd have a very stifled and stinted debate. So the public consultation is the public consultation. The public are entitled to view it. They're entitled to make up whatever opinions and ideas they want about it. And all it will do is it will inform our exempt debate. If you want to go talk to, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll have 10 minutes. You can go talk to Greg because he's in the building, and Tim Collard if he's here. And then we'll resume in 10 minutes and see what they say. Robert.
My only one was, I just taking Roger's part, I noted there weren't any public questions.
No.
As the scrutiny, I would have thought.
If it was about the public consultations of the public questions. So we're going to break for 10 minutes now. Roger can talk to Graham White and Tim Collard if he likes. Pardon?
We need to do one part.
Yeah. Is that all right? Okay. I appreciate your forbearance. It's been a long day. Right, so the next item on the agenda is the Acton Scott calling. Is that right? Sorry, I haven't got my agenda.
I thought it was
Yes.
about bullying and harassment thing, wasn't it?
There was a
Not
task
good.
and finish group, isn't there?
Oh, sorry. Sorry, I haven't got my agenda in front of me. Is it task and finish group first?
Right, yeah, okay, well, this one,
I think it's item 9, this isn't it?
last week. so this
I've got
one.
exclusion of press and public.
Right, hold on a minute. So we need to deal with the
No, I thought I saw something with task and finish group.
You said it's the
Part
work
of the work
programme.
programme.
yeah,
Stage.
we're going to delay the work programme. Yeah, we're going to delay the work programme. So have you got the
Oh, that's right, it was taken out.
yeah,
So ignore it.
alternative budget work
Chairman.
programme, we've done that, yeah.
Chairman,
Chair, can I just sort of flag on the work programme, the task and finish group which is proposed in there is the one which came out of it's a conversation around looking at, or to get a task and finish group in place to look at the council's bullying and harassment
That's it,
policy.
yeah.
Yeah,
So I suppose it's a question of whether there's any urgency in moving that forward and getting that group going before. I think your next meeting is March.
I'm quite happy for it to go forward. I noticed there was one from each group and a few officers on there, so I'm quite
Yeah.
happy to
Yeah, I agree
start
on
the
both
process
sides.
going on that.
I'm sure everybody would agree with
Yeah.
that, because everyone's.
yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Smashing. Fine. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so item number 8 is the exclusion of the press and public, and that is because item 9 is the Acton Scott Historic Working Farm call-in. So from the chair, I'm going to move the exclusion of the press and the public.
Want the door shut?
Chris is seconding that. Can we have a show of hands, please? Right. So that is 5. Who's against? 2.
Can it be noted that I voted against
Yeah,
it?
absolutely. We can we can note that you voted against that. So the press and the public will be excluded. And if you can stop us going live and tell us when we'd stop being live, Tim.
Not be live streaming, maybe, Chair.
Right.